Good evening, good folks, and welcome to the City of Muskegon City Commission work session for this Monday, February 10th, 2025. A note for this meeting, we have public comment at the end of the meeting, so after we hear from our presentations, an opportunity for a commission to have discussion on those items, we will then go to public comment before adjourning. So that'll be towards the end of the meeting, and folks can give comment in person or by phone. That number for calling is 231-724-6721. We did just test it to confirm it is working, but do not call right this moment. That is for when we get to public comment towards the end of the meeting of this work session. That number will be scrolling at the bottom of the screen as well at that time. All right, we're going to kick our meeting off with a presentation from our Public Works on lead service line replacements.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Dan Vanderhyde, the Director of Public Works for the city. And one of the things that we're doing as an effort to reach out into the community is each quarter senior staff are presenting a series of topics to the neighborhood association meetings. And we thought it would be helpful if we presented at least this particular one of the presentations to you all as well, so that you know what we're saying and you all can answer the same questions. And then also folks that are on the video with us tonight or sometime in the future can view it if they're not able to make it to a neighborhood association meeting. So this is going to be a little bit of a combination of the presentation that we're giving to the neighborhoods, and then also demonstrating some other resources and things that might not make it into every neighborhood association meeting. So the first thing to understand when we're talking about lead service line replacements, because they start with that first word, lead, Muskegon's water is safe. We have never exceeded the levels authorized by the EPA or the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. We test the water regularly, and again, have never exceeded those levels. There are occasional tests that do show a small amount of lead in the water, but it is always below the amount that is considered dangerous by the EPA. That being said, we recognize, just as everyone does, that no amount of lead in the water is a good thing. And so, at least in part because we know that, and also because we're being required to, we are working to systematically replace all of the lead service lines throughout the city. And we're doing that in a few different ways. The most noticeable are the large construction projects that we hire contractors for, and they will come into a neighborhood and replace all the lead service lines in that neighborhood over the course of a period of time. That is currently happening in the Oakview neighborhood, for example, or it was in the fall. It's paused for the weather now and will start up again in the spring. We also, as a department, replace lead service lines for various reasons. For new homes, for homes that experience problems with low flow or low pressure, as well as broken water lines and things like that. So what is a service line, or what is a lead service line? So I actually have a handy prop that I brought with me tonight. And I'm going to step away from the mic just a little bit to try to point out some of the features on it, but I'll try to speak loudly. So the
Ooh, yeah. Channel your inner pop star.
there we go. I think, maybe? Okay. So this is a demonstration board that was put together by the water department quite some time ago. So I apologize for the dust, but all the components are still there, and so I'll walk through what each of them is. So I think you can see me on the camera too. So this is the water main. This lives out in the street. This particular example is a 6-inch diameter water main. That's how big the pipe is. And that's pretty typical for the sizes that run in most of the neighborhoods in Muskegon. This contraption right here is known as the corporation, and it does two things. It's a valve, and it also is the way that we connect the service line to the water main. We have a machine that drills a hole in the side of the water main, and then that screws right into that hole, and then it has a valve that we can open up once everything else is done. This shiny part here is copper on this example board, but that piece is the offending piece if this were a lead service line. Earlier in the century, earlier in last century at this point, before we knew lead was a bad idea, it was a convenient way to connect the water main, which is long and straight and doesn't bend, to the remainder of the water service, which is also made of materials that are long and straight and don't bend. It was a convenient way to connect the two because it's lead is easily bendable. And again, in this example, it's copper, but about that much lead would exist in many of the service lines across the city of Muskegon. The next thing is called the curb stop, and that is the valve that homeowners will be familiar with out in their yard or in their driveway. It has a box, we call it, but it's a tube, actually, that comes up to the surface of the ground and allows us to get access to that, turn the water service on or off as needed. The next piece here is made of galvanized steel, and that is common also in Muskegon. That is the part that goes into the house, and then once you get inside the house, if you can imagine the wall of the house right here, typically you'll find that first valve, and then you'll find the meter. And this is an old meter, but it does much the same thing as the ones that we put in today. It measures the water that goes into the home so that we know how much you use, and it's connected in various ways. This one is connected by a wire to this white box, which would hang on the side of the house and allow the city to read that meter without going inside. Some of our meters still have that. Others now contain a cellular antenna right within the meter, and we can read them on a computer screen at any time. So we're slowly switching over to the all cellular kind, but in the meantime, we have some that still look somewhat like that one there. I'll trust Derek will turn that off. So that's the lead service line, or that's the service line that we're talking about. The chemistry is such that the lead portion means that we have to replace the entire service line. So the city doesn't own the entire service line, but we are being required by the state to replace it all the way to the meter. So everything you see on the board there is what we will replace when we come to your home. So one of the things that comes up often is who pays for the lead service line replacements, and I think that's something particularly appropriate in this group. So as you know, we come to you pretty much annually and request permission to enter into the drinking water state revolving fund program, and we essentially take out a loan, a portion of which may or may not be forgiven, depends on the particulars of the program that year. We take a 20-year loan and we use that to go out and replace lead service lines. We've been fortunate most of the time in the past to get a high level of principal forgiveness or grant associated with those projects. It is going down over time. The most recent offer, I guess you'd say, that we were given from the state includes about 25% principal forgiveness or grant, which means that the system is paying for the other 75%. And the system gets its revenue from the water that we sell to our customers, which are, by and large, our citizens, together with our businesses and neighboring communities. So, over time, as those drinking water revolving fund projects continue, we hope, it's important that they continue to have a large portion of grant, and that's something that you all can help with as you talk to other politicians and other folks out and about in the state and in the nation. If those grants, if the grant portion of those loans goes away or continues to decline, although it will be spread out over time, 100% of the cost of these improvements that we need to do will fall on the citizens and we will have to keep raising rates to keep up with that. So what should you expect when we come to your house to replace it? So we do have to get inside the home. As I said, that meter, which is usually in the basement or in the crawl space of a home, is one of the things that we need to get to and replace. And actually a good portion of the work takes place from within the house. The contractor will go in the basement, disconnect the water service, and they actually use a machine that goes out through the wall of the house and will find the water main. You do not have to dig up your entire yard as long as everything goes well. So that's a benefit. There will be some portions that will be dug up, and depending on the weather, it may take even until the following spring before we're able to restore those parts that are dug up. As I said, we do have to get into the basement of the home, so as the project approaches, a citizen would get a letter in the mail explaining the project, explaining that their house is coming up soon. With that letter, they'll see a form that authorizes us to enter into the home, us and our contractors. We hope and we ask that you would return that form that first time. If not, there will be other opportunities. As it gets closer to the time, you'll see one of these flyers or one like it hung on the door. I've given a copy to each of the commissioners. I've got some more in the back. And mostly what this is notice that it's happening and then a link to the website. Back, you'll notice a QR code as well as a short form web address. And you can head there and see all of the things that I talked about, pictures about all of it, additional resources for lead in your water and lead in your home, additional ways that you can help reduce your risk, and a few other things. And if you can bring up this computer that I have connected here, I'll just demonstrate a couple things on the website. If you were to go to mkgcity.com/LSLR, which stands for Lead Service Line Replacement, this is the website you would be brought to. And on the left there, you can see lots of links with different things that you can do and ways that you can reduce your risk. There's quite a bit of narrative here that explains what we're doing and why we're doing it. We've got a video that you can watch, and that explains a lot of what we're doing as well. And then we have a frequently asked questions section where you can get your questions answered, assuming they've been asked before. And then at the bottom, some contacts. So if you have any additional questions, you're welcome to reach out to us by any of those methods. One of the things I did want to highlight for folks is that we have a map online, and I just clicked on it there, but I'll go and show it to you again. It is this link right here. It says Lead Service Line Material GIS Map. Click on that link. It'll bring you to this page. This is some introductory information about how to use the page and so forth. And then if you go over here down at the bottom, you click on the map and the data, and this will pop up. And this is a dot representing each lead service line that the city knows of. Well, each service line that we know of, all of them, including the ones that have been replaced already and the ones that we know to be lead. So you'll see a red, yellow, and green classification here. If it's green, that means either we've already replaced it or your service line never had any lead included. If your service line is red, that means we believe it does contain lead, and it's part of those projects and those efforts to replace them. And if your service line is yellow, that means that we believe at some point in the past your service line had lead. We are required by the state to replace it because of that. So it may not contain lead now, but in order to be extra sure, we're going to replace it anyway. So that's the website. And that's pretty much all I have to say other than answer questions.
Thank you, Director Van Dyke. Yes, Mr. Manager.
Director Van Dyke, can you pull that map back up for
Yeah.
a second?
Yeah.
And maybe zoom in and click on one of the dots just to kind of illustrate what information's in there.
pick one that we lead. If you click on it, it'll show the address that we have associated with it. It'll show some additional information. Some of this is helpful, some of it is not. So you can see the various data points, I guess, that we know there. Again, this is a red one, so we see the federal classification there is lead. And again, that's just a small piece of the water service is lead, but enough of it that it is considered to be a lead service line. And then you can see some other information, such as if we know the public side material, and that's on the street side of that curb stop box that I mentioned, the valve that you will see in your yard or your driveway. We consider everything towards the street of there, the public side, and everything towards the house of that, the private side. In this case, you can see they're both galvanized. And if you go to this map and you see what you believe to be an error, please reach out, let us know. This data is the best information that we have, but if anyone has other information, we'd be happy to come out and double check. We probably will ask if we can get in your basement to double check. We might take a little sliver of the material of the service line in the basement, depending on whether we can tell or not, and we'll change it if it's wrong. Yeah.
And then Director Vander had another follow-up question. So this summer we did work over in Bluffton, and if you zoom over to that point of the map, there's still some red and yellow lines there, but as part of the construction project, we did replace those. Can you kind of explain the timing on the map getting updated and things of that nature in case someone maybe saw their, and obviously we've done individual ones as well. So if someone's looking, there might be a delay, just kind of explaining that.
Sure. So if it's an individual service line that like we, the city, have done, for example, it probably gets updated quicker than if it was part of a project. So we are, this is part of the inventory data that we had to provide to the state. And so we can only change these colors when we have all of the documents required by the state to prove that that service line is no longer lead. And so until we get the project contract closed out, get all of the documents back from the contractor proving that they replaced the lead service line with a new one, and so on and so forth, we are not allowed to change that color, but it will change. And if you ever have any questions or believe that there's an error there, feel free to call, and we can give you the latest information we have, or come out and double check.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Thank you, Director Vander Heide. Commissioners, any questions or thoughts you wish to share on this? Yes, Commissioner Cochin.
First off, thank you so much, Director Vander Heide, for coming and explaining this, especially with the visuals. I think that does help people at home, especially kind of understand what the process is. I've got some questions that I know I've been asked, and wanted to kind of share those. So everybody got that letter, and kind of freaked out a little bit. So the letter that you were talking about that people would receive when it's time for the lead lines to actually be replaced, that's going to be a different letter, correct?
It is. I'm glad you brought that up. So yes, in October or so, we sent a letter to everybody in the city, and we told them what we thought their service line was made of. And we said if it was lead, that we would be replacing it at some point, probably prior to 2037. And if it was not lead, we said, we're pretty sure it's not. But if you know different, let us know. They will get a different letter when their service line has been included in a project or identified by the city in some other way as about to be replaced. They will also get a copy of that letter each year. So as part of some improvements to the rules that the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy made recently, we are required to send that letter every year. Mm-hmm. That some of the other improvements made as a part of that rule included providing this information that's shown on the website to the state, so that they have a database of all the lead service lines, and also included us setting up this map so that folks could double check what it is at any time, not just once a year.
Thank you. The other question was, You brought up the map, which is wonderful. I think that's probably one of the most useful tools to be able to go to and check your residents and see what the status is. Like you said, there's a delay on that status, and so if they're unsure, to reach out to you guys to confirm.
Yes, please.
On the map there, you were showing the yellow and the GRR/GPCL. Can you expound on what that is, please?
Sure. So this will get a little technical, but I'll do the best I can. So the chemistry of metals is the reason that that yellow category exists. So as I said, and I think maybe some of you at least can still see the board there, the portion that was lead, which is just a small 12, maybe 18-inch long piece right up next to the water main. When the water sits, when it's stagnant, so when it sits for a period of time overnight, for example, very small amount of the lead can leach into the water. If that moves downstream in the water service, chemistry is such that the galvanized steel can actually pull that lead back out of the water and into itself, thereby contaminating that galvanized steel piping as well. And so the GRR GPCL stands for galvanized requiring replacement and galvanized previously connected to lead. So even if that small portion of lead was removed from the service line, it's possible that some of the materials downstream of it contain lead as well, and that's why the entire thing has to be replaced.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The last thing is you were talking about one of the samples that you went off of, but it said full replacement. And for clarification, that means the entire line or just a segment?
So it means the entire line. It means everything that you see below there on the board, the water main excluded. So the water main may or may not be replaced. It depends on the project. But when we talk about replacing the service line, we're talking about a new tap into the water main, a new service line all the way through to the basement or crawl space or whatever it may be of the home, and in almost all cases, even a new meter. We do not replace the piping inside the home. Mm-hmm. Private plumbing inside the home, whatever the material may be, and it may very well be galvanized steel, that is common in our town, but we will not replace those pipes. We are not both obligated to, and it would be quite the project to replace, all the pipes and all the.
Mm-hmm. If somebody has those kind of pipes in their home, who would they talk to about getting that taken care of?
Sure. Any plumber should be able to give them an estimate on what it would take to do that, and it could be relatively simple for a small one-story home if everything is plumbed kind of in the ceiling of the basement, so to speak. It could be quite a bit more complicated if it's a multi-story home.
Thank you, Commissioner Cochin. Commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner German.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And good evening, Director Van Hyde.
Good evening.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the demonstration and the visual that really can give citizens and residents a view of how this operation is conducted. And I got a chance to see that firsthand, and everything that you stated in your demonstration and your presentation was right on point. I just like the fact that we have information out here on the internet for our citizens and residents to go to and see, and also the handouts and information. Now, you did say the EGLE collects and keeps track with all of this data. That's statewide, correctly? Okay. All right. So basically my comment was just, thanking you for what you're doing and the good job that you're doing, laying this information to the public.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner German. Yep. Commissioner Kilco.
Thank you. Thank you for being here this evening, Director. My question is, how does our Department of Public Works choose where we're going next? What neighborhoods, what streets, as far as schedule of service?
Sure. So it's a number of factors. We're in the unenviable position of having a lot of this work to do. You know, more than most communities in Michigan, and as much as the communities of a similar size and age to us. So we don't have to be very picky. We can go pretty much wherever we want to and find them. However, there are some parts of the city where things are more dense, I guess you would say. There are more lead pipes than other locations. And if I zoom back out, you can see that. So the first thing we're looking at is how to get the most done we possibly can for the least money, system cost. You can see, for example, on the map, kind of in the Oakview, Sheldon Park neighborhoods there's a lot of red. So that's where a lot of our efforts are happening right now. I'll zoom in on the Marshfield neighborhood, and not to give everybody a headache. So you can see this is an area where there's a lot of homes of an age where they are lead, or we think they're likely to be lead. So one of our first projects was in this neighborhood, and you can see we turned a large portion of that neighborhood green. So similarly, in the Oakview and Sheldon Park neighborhoods, which is where our contractors are working in general right now, you can see a lot of homes close together and a lot of lead service lines there. So that's where we're targeting. The efforts that the city does are a little bit more complex. They're based mostly on a number of other factors that aren't really related to whether or not the line is lead. So we'll get folks who call in and say that their service line is broken, or someone building a home on a now empty lot, they need a new service line. Somebody calls and says that their water pressure is really, really bad, or there's hardly any water coming out of the tap, and we investigate and find that their service line is very old and is a part of that problem, and therefore we will replace that one. So I guess in summary, if it's a project-based replacement, it's being targeted at the neighborhoods that have, I guess we'll call it the most lead service lines, or the most lead service line density is probably the best way to say it. And if it's being done by the city ourselves, it could be any number of factors.
Thank you for that. And my last question is, optimistically, when would you say that we would have the majority of the city done?
So if the funding that we have been able to take advantage of over the past 5 years or so continues, we expect that we would be done toward the middle of the next decade, 2035 or so. The rules that we are under obligate us to complete the project as of right now by 2037. That's a federal rule. If that were to go away, the state still has their own rule, which currently requires us to be done by 2040. So I can say that there's no doubt as of right now that we'll be done by 2040, and it's very likely that we will be done sooner than that, but it is not very likely that we will be done much sooner than that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kogo. Any other questions or thoughts to share? Commissioner Coach.
So if folks want to find out when their service lines will be replaced, is there any way for them to contact somebody and find out, or are we just kind of waiting as things kind of come along with the road projects?
Yeah, they're always welcome to call DPW and to ask, and we will let them know if theirs is scheduled as a part of any project or anything like that. The fact is the majority of them are not yet scheduled in a project just because there are so many. But give us a call and we'll give you our best estimate. And is there any other questions you may have?
One follow-up. To follow up with that, if there were, say, a home with children in it with elevated lead levels, would we be looking at that area more so for remediation?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. And in fact, if anyone has children who've been tested and have high lead levels, they can contact our CNS department. We have programs there that will help with lead abatement, and that includes lead service line replacement and other things inside the home, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cochin. Yeah, to piggyback on that, our Healthy Homes program, the City of Muskegon and our Community Neighborhood Services Department was successful in getting an additional $1.5 million grant, which is the city administering for the whole county, correct? It's not just the City of Muskegon. We were, I think, one of 13 in the whole state to get that funding. And so kudos and thanks to CNS for securing those resources. There is some open concern about its getting to us and being distributed and dispersed by the federal government. It had been committed and allocated. There's some concern about the timeline and the guarantee that it's going to come through. So hopefully it does come through, and we'll have those resources that are available for any homes in our city or throughout Muskegon County that have concerns, whether that's lead infiltration through paint or otherwise in the home, or other concerns about the health of the property. So this program, just to kind of tied up and reinforced for our community. This program is a result, or this mandate is a result of the state. The state said you must replace these. It gave us an initial 20-year timeline. The Fed is now, the EPA now has a 10-year timeline. The 10-year timeline is by 2037. We were already underway and further along than the state timeline. And we are fairly confident that we'll meet the federal timeline as it currently exists. But there are no financial commitments that go along with that mandate necessarily. So what we are, and thank you to you and your team for doing as much as you can to identify those revolving loans and then the forgivable aspects of it, the grants, so that we can lessen the cost burden on our residents and our water users. Unfortunately, it is being shouldered by us and our community by and large. That's a result of this mandate. It is not a result of us surpassing any action levels. We do not have an identified lead and water problem in the city. Our water distribution system, which serves our city residents as well as numerous other municipalities throughout Muskegon County, there's no identified lead and water problem. This is the state with its mandate, the EPA at the federal level with its rules, as an abundance of caution to prevent, to mitigate and reduce any risk of future lead exposure to homeowners and residents. So, as you mentioned, with the loan program, the low interest loan program, with that aspect that is forgivable, the grant portion of it, that has been lessening each year. So that's something for all of us on this commission and everyone watching this meeting to emphasize to your state and federal officials, be they elected or appointed, that communities like ours would very much welcome additional resources to replace these lead service lines, whether it is by virtue of low interest loans and forgivable grants, or if there's additional resources to be passed along. But thank you so much for updating us on this project, the progress of the project, how we are communicating to our individual property owners as well as to our neighborhoods. I appreciate you're going to each of the neighborhood associations to present on this. This map is a very good tool, so that I'm sure we hear from residents periodically, hey, what's my status? And rather than just saying, hey, call DPW, or each of us tracking down DPW and saying, hey, so-and-so at this address, what's the status? Now we can refer them to this tool. So thank you so much for presenting and the work that you're doing.
I'll just reiterate one time that if anyone's watching and would like to go see this website, including the map, the address, there's a shortened address you can get to, which is mkgcity.com/LSLR.
Excellent. Thank you. And next up, we have City of Muskegon Park rules. Good evening, good sir. Welcome. If you kindly introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kyle Krajewski, Director of Parks and Recreation, City of Muskegon.
Good evening. So you got a report out for us on some forthcoming park rules.
We do. So in late 2024, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee voted unanimously to adopt or to suggest to a commission these rules, and I will quickly go through them, and we'll have a short discussion and see if I need to send them back or if we're happy with where they're at. So, and these would be for all of our parks. Certain parks have individual rules due to the way that they operate, but this would be a blanket rules throughout the entire park system. So hours of operation, 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. No littering. Leash laws, keep your pets on a leash. Some parks may have an off-leash area, but always check the rules and make sure to clean up after your pet. No smoking or vaping. No alcohol. No fires or grills. There are certain instances where there are designated areas for barbecuing or bonfires. Respect wildlife. Do not feed or disturb wildlife. Keep a safe distance and observe animals from afar. We do have a lot of cases of people feeding birds in parks, so that was a very important one we wanted to get on there. Stay in designated areas, whether you're driving or walking. Make sure that you stick to areas. We also have a lot of environmentally sensitive areas in our parks as well. No vandalism. Keep the noise level respectful to the neighborhood. No unauthorized motor vehicles. And to follow an event rule if you're attending a special event. And just for some background, these rules, we brought them together really for resident safety. With the investments we're making in our parks, we want to make sure that people are going to our parks, getting outside more, improving the quality of life, and feeling safe while doing it. We want our park rangers to be supported. We plan to start them in May, so we need to make sure that we have some guidelines and good infrastructure set up before that happens. So with all the parks having new rules posted, we hope that will help support our park rangers' efforts. And the park ranger will be focusing on education, not ticketing. So the main thing is, after there's been parks that don't have rules posted, you see someone doing something, it's not an immediately giving them citation. It's more or less an educational campaign across the board for all of our parks. And we also have discussed these with the police department, and they agree and support them, and we'll be working together with them to help improve the safety of our parks. So with that said, open it up to discussion from the commission.
Thank you, Director Krajewski. Commissioners, questions, comments? Commissioner Kilgo.
Thank you. Director, do you know the legal smoking age in the state of Michigan?
Of marijuana or of tobacco?
Tobacco.
18.
It is 21 years old.
Okay.
So legal smoking age 21, and there's clear evidence that secondhand smoke is harmful to humans. But many studies have been done showing, one by the Public Health Institute of England, showing that vaping or e-cigarettes are about 95% less harmful than cigarettes. I'm curious why we have an outdoor ban on smoking in public parks.
Well, that was what came from the police department. They said that includes vaping as well. So when they're enforcing a non-smoking area, vaping's included in that.
Okay.
And also the health of your neighbor's secondhand vape, and also when there's THC vape and it's hard to distinguish between one or the other, just trying to keep that out of the parks.
So THC or flower marijuana both have a distinct smell, vaping or burning combustible marijuana. They have a distinct smell. But I'm not so sure on the vaping being a public health hazard. And an adult who would be in the park who was vaping not be approached by a park ranger for doing something that outdoors. Michigan has a state law that went into effect May 1st, 2010 that prohibits smoking in most public buildings, restaurants, public areas like that. So we do have a smoking and vaping ban in the state of Michigan for indoors, but I just don't understand the outdoor at a public park. It's not going to be harmful to others if someone is vaping.
Understood. It is subjective. We've had people who have come out to us, and especially me as the parks director, who said that you have people around a playground and they're blowing these huge plumes of vape, and there's kids playing. So it was something that the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee felt like was across the board. You have to include them both. But of course, this is feedback that I can take back to them.
For sure. Yeah, and then the other one that I saw, I just don't know if the language, maybe we can change the language. Number 6, no fires or grills. It says open flames are not allowed unless in designated areas for barbecuing or bonfires. Could we just say something like open flames are only allowed in designated areas? I mean, it says no fires or grills, but then you say, well, there are certain places for grilling or something like that. So
Yeah,
I'm just
More positive, sure. Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
that way it's not, it's clear. It's not saying no if we say barbecuing, grilling only allowed in designated areas or something like that. I just think it's clear that way.
Yeah, I understand that.
The rest of them that I read over, I think are pretty straightforward. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, for item 6, you just get rid of the word no, because then you can say fires or grills, and then it says open flames are not allowed unless in designated areas for barbecuing or bonfires. So it's just a matter of removing the no from there, because the rest of it explains the rule itself.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Commissioner Koshin, did I see your hand up?
I do, yeah. But I took a lot of time last time, so I was going to let somebody take some time this time. But if nobody else has anything, then yes, Director Karczewski. So the rule number 12, following event rules. If you're attending a special event, adhere to any specific rules or guidelines provided. Can you kind of explain what the thought process behind that one is?
Yeah, there's certain events that, due to the nature of them, they have things that are allowed that number 1 through 11 might call out to say they're not allowed. For instance, Burning Foot. I've heard there is alcohol consumed at Burning Foot. There is camping there. So that's an event that goes through several levels of approval. And so for certain activities like that, for instance, Hackley Park, we have the parties in the park. Typically, there's not alcohol allowed. However, for that event, it is closed off, and there are some differential rules for that specific event pertaining to the special event.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so Rule 12 kind of allows for those kind of special instances. That rule then, or any of these rules wouldn't be, how do I want to phrase that? They wouldn't take precedence over, say, state rules and laws, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kochin. So we could add, Ms. Manager just pointed out that with regard to item 5, no alcohol, consumption of alcohol is prohibited in City of Muskegon parks, that one of our parks, and perhaps in the future more, but one of them presently, Hackley Park, is within a social drinking district. And so we would need to have some clarification there, and perhaps it's just a matter of consumption of alcohol is prohibited in the City of Muskegon parks, unless in a designated social drinking district. Or we could, maybe just we use that verbiage. I was going to say, or we could specifically call it Hackley Park, but if more parks get added in the future, we don't necessarily want to have to update all of our signs every time. So perhaps it's just a matter of saying unless in a designated social drinking district. Yes, Commissioner Kochin.
That's a good point, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Manager. The other thing that comes to mind is the deck. Are they technically in the park?
Yes.
And they serve alcohol? So we might want to work on our phrasing on that one.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, but
Except for in designated areas.
yeah, well, except for the deck is a different situation because it's a liquor control zone as a business, and it's not generally out in the park, so you can't
Take your
you,
drink
you can't take
outside.
your drink outside of the liquor control zone. So that I think would be a different situation where the Hackley Park one, which I apologize, Director Karchevsky, I should have thought of this last week when we were talking about it. But for the Hackley Park one, because it's in the middle of a social district, people can just traverse the park with alcohol. So I understand where you're coming from, but I would see them slightly different. Yeah.
I see a distinction as well. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner German.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director. And thanks, Commissioner, for bringing that number 5 item up. My question about the alcohol. Most families go out, for, parties or events or just family outings. I guess my question would be, what would be the outcome of if someone got caught with alcohol from the park rangers? How would they handle that? And there's no drinking or no alcohol allowed in that park. But just say, for instance, I see people all the time, sometimes with red cups, sitting in the park, not bothering anyone, just getting out just to relax and have a peace of mind, and they may have a drink or two. How would that be enforced, or would they get a ticket or a warning, or
Yeah, it'll be big on education. It'll be, if there is constant abusers, we'll get the police department involved. But the main premises for these rules list is to educate and make the park safer. So we're not, like I said, we're not really looking to give a bunch of tickets. We're looking to inform and educate people so that the next time they come, they'll realize that that's not something you should be doing here.
right. And that's what I was going to say, because some of them may not even know that we have enforced these rules or anything like that as well. So
Yeah, and there's also, there's a lot of situations like that where it's just a family, but there's also, that's the other side of it. There's a lot of situations where it's a lot more than just a family having a nice drink. It's, something that makes kids and people feel safe at the parks,
Right.
and so that's what we're trying to address.
yeah. All right, thank you for that explanation.
And the glass.
Thank you, Commissioner German.
Yeah.
Before I go back to Commissioner Cochin, I just want to check in with Vice Mayor St. Clair, Commissioner Gorman, if they have anything to ask or add right now. Okay, Commissioner Cochin?
Director Karchevsky, was there any discussion about including glass in any of those rules? Because I know that's in a lot of municipalities and communities, that's a big issue, especially when you're talking about banning alcohol. It's usually you can't have alcohol because people are smashing glass bottles after they've been drinking. Was that part of the conversation during the board meeting? Do you know?
No, glass wasn't. A lot of times when I've had that conversation, it's when alcohol is allowed, but glass is not. And since we're going into this no alcohol period, we didn't even bother going the route with glass because there are other options for glass, but it typically goes hand in hand with a container for alcohol.
Okay, all right, thank
But it
you.
is a good idea, to just add that in there. I understand why we don't want that in parks.
Thank you, Commissioner Cochin. Commissioner Kilgo?
Yeah, I just have a couple more curious questions. So currently, if someone had an alcoholic beverage at one of our parks, if they weren't in a public intoxication manner, it would be not against any ordinances. Is that correct?
It would. Public safety does not allow that.
Okay, so it's already a public safety thing. So
Yes. These
so
are
then
all
we're-
ordinances. These are all basically have an ordinance with them.
This is for the signage to go at each park. This is the adoption of the verbiage for the signs, because several of these are already codified in our city code of ordinance.
Okay.
This is the language that would go on the park rule signs on each of the
Perfect.
parks. So it needs to be universal across the park system.
Okay, so we do already have a no alcohol ordinance in our parks.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. My second question are park rangers fully deputized law enforcement, or are they just park rangers? Are they armed? I'm curious. I haven't met one of our park rangers yet.
They will not be, due to the credentials that our public safety department holds. It has to only be uniformed police officers. So that's why another reason why we're trying to go for education instead of writing citations. We have discussed that citations would be helpful, especially at the beach when we have abundance of dogs out there. But along public safety, they've been hesitant to give them an open book to write citations with. And this is the beginning of our park ranger program. They haven't started yet. We're going to hire them in the late spring, and then they're going to train with the police department and figure out the best way to handle these, whether it's a call to an officer on duty and they have a list of who's working in the areas, or if there's a couple small citations they may be allowed to write after multiple warnings.
So they'll be radioed up, and they can radio an officer if they need an actual law enforcement officer?
Yes.
Okay. And then my last question is, the no smoking and vaping policy currently in ordinance?
There is presently an ordinance for a portion of Pure Marquette Park that smoking is not allowed. It has not been enforced consistently. That was one of the things that was raised at the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. Like, okay, you already have this ordinance that precludes or prohibits smoking in the designated area, but it's not consistently enforced. So how are we going to be confident that as this is expanded, that we're going to be able to enforce it? And so if I may interject here, because piggybacking what you just said, it was my understanding that park rangers, as we're bringing back and reviving the park rangers program, that our initial park rangers would have the ability to write citations for violations of these rules. But now I'm hearing that that's not the case. But maybe, like, they're going to work with the police and public safety about potentially allowing them to write citations, or like, how does that look? Because that was also one of the other concerns, is like, if we've got these park rangers writing the citations, it lessens the need for our police officers to be there, and they can be, where they're most needed, elsewhere in our community. And so I'm just trying to square that now. There was a little bit of new information for me. Sorry to jump in on you interject, but I would be interested in better understanding that dynamic.
Yeah. And my last question, I'm also very curious, like the mayor is. So Pure Marquette is a park. It's one of our parks. And if we have a no smoking and no vaping policy, and we have park rangers, then every person throughout the summer that's at our beach and they're vaping could be potentially have an interaction with this said park ranger. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not in favor of number 4. I just think it's gonna create more unnecessary interactions with our park rangers. For people who are enjoying the outdoors. Yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Kilgo.
And to your point, Mayor Johnson, that was our intention too. We just recently heard that there's some issues with accreditation, and exactly what will be allowed for them to do is something we're going to dive into once we begin the hiring process for our
Is
park
this a
ranger.
result? Maybe Mr. Manager wants to chime in here, but is this a result of our police department having undergone the accreditation process?
Yes.
A couple years ago, and so as part of being an accredited police agency, we cannot have
So there,
other people aside from fully sworn officers.
So there's-
issuing
there's-
citations.
there's a couple different layers to it, and as we were starting to talk through it, there were some challenges that were coming up, some of which also include the fact that the park rangers are seasonal. So if someone was to say challenge a ticket and it was to go to court, and they were no longer an employee come the fall, and that was to go to court in the fall, and you can't have that officer or the ranger show up for the court hearing, that creates another complication there as well. So there's a variety of different factors that we're working through to make sure that whatever it is that we are allowing the rangers to do, it complies with everything that we need to comply with regarding being an accredited agency, and that we're able to carry through those enforcements through the court process if needed. Now, hopefully, that won't be needed, and we're kind of overthinking this a little bit. But as we were kind of starting to pull that string, that was one of the things that was coming up.
Okay. All right. It'd be nice if we could have park rangers year round, but let's start with our couple of park rangers seasonal at least, and
Seasonal,
we can
yeah.
grow it from there. Ideally, now it was very appealing to me that our park rangers were going to be able to have the citation powers, so they can respond immediately. Preferably with warning or notice first. We're not trying to be heavy-handed, and any of our fines are meant to ensure compliance, not so that we are generating revenue. That's not our motivation. It is to ensure compliance with our rules and our policies, not to try to extract revenue from folks. And so I did see it as appealing to the park rangers to be able to respond promptly, after issuing appropriate notice or warning, rather than having to call in police officers to do that. However, I do, as I'm reflecting on this, I can see it becoming problematic with park rangers, particularly if they're seasonal, and aren't certified or exceptionally trained on how to interact with folks while issuing citations. That can create a whole another problematic dynamic. And so I'm okay. Even if we never get to the point where the park rangers can issue citations, I think I'm comfortable with what you're envisioning, where the park rangers can inform, give notice of the rules, and if there are violations, and if need be, based upon continuing rule violations, or that they can call in enforcement as necessary, and let the sworn officers who are professionally trained in those situations to handle it rather than one of our parks employees. So, okay. All right. Any other questions or comments right now? Commissioner German.
Just one more question. Yeah, thank you. Director. Number 3, that's pretty straightforward. But I do have some concerns once pets are off the lease. And some dogs are bigger than others. Have there been any thought maybe of having muzzles on pets as an ordinance also when they're in these settings?
There wasn't that thought from me. I believe that would probably be a public safety conversation. If muzzles were put on dogs, are you referring to areas that dogs
In
would be
the
allowed
park.
off the leash?
Well, no. Like in the park setting, and it states that the dog should be kept on the pet should be kept on a leash. Some parks may have off leash areas, and for instance, if this was the case, given a bigger dog, pit bull, Rottweiler, or something like that, sometimes could attack smaller dogs or something like that, or maybe even residents or.
Yeah, well, the only areas would be the dog beach and the dog park. And the dog park is split into larger and smaller dogs. And also at the dog beach, there are signs that say, you are coming to the dog beach, but you still need to control your dog. If you cannot control your dog, you cannot be there. So I know that's subjective and up to everyone's, opinion, but that's our way that we deal with that. Muzzles hasn't been something that we've.
Yeah. It just came to mind because I've actually, witnessed an incident like that happen when I was out of town, and a larger dog attacked a smaller dog in a public park. So.
Don't want that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think our general ordinance regarding, which we updated about a year ago, regarding owners' responsibilities would cover that. Because we had, because I think previously it had only addressed one type of dog, and so we made it more general to just being dangerous animals. And I'm trying to talk and skim at the same time as I read to find it, but it's that section of the code is chapter 6 animals in our ordinance, and so I believe that would cover that. Yeah.
I do remember that. Yeah. So.
Apparently, I can't skim and talk at the same time.
Yeah, every vicious dog or cat is determined by a police officer or the animal control authority shall be confined by its owner within a building or secure enclosure and shall be securely muzzled or caged whenever off the premises of its owner. So if there's a history of incidences or a police officer, animal control has identified the dog, regardless of breed, of being a dangerous animal, then it must be muzzled when not on their home premises. I'm just thinking is to perhaps be more concise in the leash laws piece or something. I would use must instead of should. You know, pets must be kept on a leash instead of should, just to be more matter of fact or definitive. Kept on a leash. Some parks may have off leash areas, but always check the rules. I think we should probably say always check the rules of that individual park, or because some people say always check the rules, and like, well, aren't these the rules? Like I'm reading right now, and so if we could just have like some clarifying language as to where they should be checking, or what to check to confirm. Or could we just say pets must be kept on a leash unless in a designated area? that
Only two
allows
areas.
Off leash.
There's only 2 areas.
And
yeah.
there's and so if they see no signage or anything indicating that this is off leash, and we probably want to add something. I mean, it's obvious at the dog park, but I don't know what signage we have at the dog beach to say, hey, no, this is. I think there used to be a sign that said this way is dogs and off leash. So it could be just that. I don't know.
It could be something as simple as having another sign, like a small sign that says, like off leash area which is obvious, I think, at the dog park, but then maybe going down the steps at Cruzy or something along those lines, so that people know. And then if they don't see that, then it just should be pets shall be kept on or must be kept on leash.
Yeah, when you get to the bottom of the stairs at Cruzy, there's a sign that says, dog beach. It directs you.
Yeah.
Where dogs are designated in, where they're not.
You know what I also just realized is that there is at Pure Marquette, dogs are not allowed on the beach, even if on leash, unless it's the shoulder season. So like during the summer, they can't be on the beach, period. Leashed or unleashed. And so seeing this rules there, people would naturally say, oh no, I can have my dog here as long as it's on a leash. Are there any other parks outside of Pure Marquette Beach that dogs are prohibited at any portion of the year that we're aware of? I think it's just Pure Marquette Beach.
Are they allowed at Harbortown?
And there are several signs there, as we know. But
Are dogs allowed at Harbortown Beach? Or does that just follow the same restriction? That during the summer season, they're not. But otherwise.
I can't tell you specifically. I mean, the idea of no dogs going to the restroom on the sand would, or the bat, you would think it would. I believe there is a sign there too when you enter that says no dogs.
Okay. What would be your suggestion, or what do you think is like where dogs are allowed or pets are allowed? They must be kept on a leash. Well, some parks may have off-leash areas, some designated areas. I'm just trying to, because I know if we put this up at Pure Marquette, people are gonna be like, "No, look at these rules," and they're gonna be fighting with anyone telling them they can't have a dog on the beach at Pure Marquette because they're like, "No, look at these rules. They're posted right here. Don't tell me I can't have my dog on this beach. It's on a leash." And we don't want to create that,
No.
that dynamic with our park rangers or law enforcement or anyone else interacting with people at Pier Marquette Beach. And so I think we just need to figure out a way to clarify that. But that doesn't have to be right this moment.
Yeah, yeah, and it's
You
tough
wanna
because there's a lot
reflect
of
on that.
things that it's just a one park rule, so
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to just put a a guideline for all the parks. But yeah,
Maybe it just said where allowed, pets should be kept on leash. And then that takes away the.
What was that, city manager?
Where allowed.
Okay.
Just say like where allowed. Oh, sorry, I should probably. Where allowed.
Commissioner Gilgo.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of clarification. We're voting on this tomorrow?
It's right now on the consent agenda for tomorrow's commission meeting.
Okay. I don't want any of these rules to create unnecessary police interactions with the citizens. Parks, yep, they should have rules. They should be posted. But I just want us to keep that in mind, that I just don't want unnecessary police interactions at any of our parks, really, but some of these rules may not have that effect.
Thank you, Commissioner Kilgo. Do you think that you'll have something revised by tomorrow to be put on the consent agenda, or do you think this is something that should be referred back to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee meeting? It's not set to meet again, though, until March 19th. So if that's the case, would that be enough lead time, for them to review and, send it back to the commission to then be adopted so that signage can be, implemented in time for the season? Mr. Manager.
Oh, I guess from what I'm seeing is I'm not seeing any substantive changes from what the Parks and Rec Committee has recommended to the commission. It's more some tweaking of verbiage. So I don't know what Dr. Karczewski's schedule looks like tomorrow, if he would have time to work on that, or we could certainly bump it to the meeting on the 25th.
Oh.
And do it that way. But I would say staff could probably handle these changes because they're pretty minor tweaks. It's not like we're saying that a rule should be removed. These are in compliance with our current ordinances. So there's no new ordinances that are being created here. We're just seeing how the wording should go. So I would defer to staff on that.
I would be comfortable with that myself. I would agree with that. That's the tweaks that's being discussed are in alignment with what had been recommended by the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. So I don't see a compelling rationale for it to go back to them for review. You could these are kind of like almost grammatical, clerical tweaks and adjustments. That if you're able to get that done by tomorrow, or bring it to the February 25th meeting with those adjustments. I know there's the one piece that is more substantive, and this one member of the commission has indicated that they're not keen on including vaping as being prohibited there. That I don't necessarily see as needing to go back to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. The City Commission, at its pleasure, can adopt it as is with the no smoking or vaping, or make a modification to it, or remove it entirely. We will, as a corollary, need to update our code of ordinances so that is enforceable and not just a park rule, that this is a ordinance, in effect by ordinance. Because otherwise, we would not be able to enforce it whatsoever. It would just be, hey, please don't do this. And I don't think that's our intent necessarily. We need to have some enforcement mechanism to ensure compliance, not just please don't do this.
and Chief Gozel did point out to include vaping, so I might get some more clarification from him as to why and what our how we're currently managing that.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, particularly if that came from public safety and they suggested including the vaping prohibition along with smoking generally. I think it'd be helpful to understand what their rationale was. I know at the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee that was discussed whether explicitly whether to prohibit vaping along with smoking or to have that be separated and just be no smoking. And Parks and Rec was intentional. The Parks and Rec Advisory Committee was intentional in keeping vaping as prohibited alongside smoking. And so it would be good to hear from the public safety director, and perhaps also reaching out to our Muskegon County or Public Health Muskegon County for their insights in terms of potential health implications for vaping from secondhand exposure, and just doing some quick searches, and I would want to do more research myself or hear from Muskegon County Public Health to give me better understanding. But from reading from the American Heart Association, indicated that exposure to secondhand aerosols from e-cigarettes is associated with increased risk of bronchitis symptoms and shortness of breath among young adults, especially among those who don't smoke or vape themselves. And that aerosols from vaping contain heavy metals and ultrafine particles. From nicotine to heavy metals such as lead, nickel, and zinc, cancer-causing substances as benzene and diacetyl, and then just some open question about, there's still merits further research and study on this, but yeah. So maybe, I don't know if Public Health in Muskegon County has some insights to share with us. I mean, not only just for us, but also for our community, because our community is going to have the same. There are a number of people in our community are going to have the same questions or concerns about the vaping. So if we have information from Public Health Muskegon County, as well as information from public safety, so that we can explain as to if we do adopt this prohibition, here are the reasons why. Yes, Commissioner
I have
Cochin.
two things. One thing is this just in our chartered parks or all parks in the city?
All parks.
All parks, okay. And then the second thing is, as you brought up, Mr. Mayor, getting more information from the county and bringing it up to public safety and trying to get some more explanation from the thought process on that. I just kind of don't feel great about pushing that to tomorrow. And I would feel much more comfortable doing that, on the 25th would be the soonest.
It just changed from a few words to finding out a lot about vaping. So.
We'll pull it off.
Yeah.
We'll pull it off for tomorrow.
Yeah, okay. So we should not expect this on the, it will not be on the consent agenda tomorrow, and will be brought forward at the earliest February 25th with those tweaks, as well as additional information with regard to vaping. Also, in addition to hearing public safety with regard to why they wanted vaping to be prohibited, can we get some better understanding as to how they anticipate enforcing on this?
Yeah, like how would that work during festivals?
Probably do it in tandem next time.
Well, during festivals, that'd be event rules.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be necessarily enforcing during the special events. Because with the special event permit, you get to deviate from the existing rules. So, all right, commissioners, anything else to ask or add at this time? No? Do you have anything, Director Karczewski, to ask of us, or anything further? Or anything else you wish to share with us?
I guess since I'm up here and you want me to come back next month, so we just so we're on the same page here. Define further leash laws, including Pierre Marquette, how to call out that pets should be kept on a leash where they're allowed to be. Working on vaping. No alcohol, include unless in a social district. And the enforcement of it, also the enforcement of the citation for the park ranger. Anything other than that?
I don't think so. Commissioners, is there anything else that you'd like to address? Okay. Well, thank you, Director
Yep.
Karczewski.
Thank you.
All right, next item. Shaw Walker Affordable Housing Agreement. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Jake Eckholm. I'm the Director of Development Services with the City of Muskegon.
Thank you.
So we have two documents in front of you tonight. We're going to start with the Affordable Housing Agreement. So these, I wanted to walk through these in a work session because they're both going to be new documents the Commission hasn't walked through before. And they're a little bit different than some of our other development agreements we've used for more traditional development. As we know, tomorrow we'll be hearing consideration from the developer for your vote on the transformational brownfield project for the Shaw Walker redevelopment. Last month, you'll recall at the work session, they gave a pretty in-depth presentation on that project and what that entails. Our component for the last month has been negotiating these two component agreements that go with that transformational brownfield plan. The first is the Affordable Housing Agreement. So the amendment to Public Act 381, which is the Michigan Brownfield Act that created the Transformational Brownfield Fund and project eligibility, offers the opportunity for developers to receive 100% of state income tax as one of the additional benefits of transformational brownfield, with the caveat that they have to have an agreed upon affordable housing agreement with the local unit of government. This agreement represents our work with our city attorney's office, the council for Parkland, and then obviously the developer and multiple divisions here at the city to put this in front of you this evening for consideration tomorrow. So the biggest thing I want to point you to is several aspects of the definitions. So the term of the agreement, it's commences in 2028, which is the estimated year for the project's rental stock to be operated and leased up, and goes for 20 years after that. And the project is expected, as we know, to start in spring of 2025 and should be completed within that 36-month time frame to coincide with the beginning of that affordability period for those folks. When we're talking about affordable, obviously we get this a lot from our constituents and those we serve, that affordable is a very subjective term. MISHDA and MEDC, for the purposes of this statute, take affordable units to be at or below 100% of the AMI as defined by MISHDA for Muskegon County. So these units will be required to have a rolling annual average of 20 rental units. It's in reality going to be a lot more than that, but the rolling annual average per the statute has to be 20 units, and they have to accommodate folks that are at or below 100% of the area's median income. We go through a lot of specifications that, you know, these units have to be effectively the same in quality and finish as the market rate units. In the event that somebody goes over income, there's a grace period of the 12-month lease period for them to either go back into income guidelines. Otherwise, that unit doesn't count as an affordable unit anymore, and they have to make the next comparable unit available as an affordable unit. We also give a little bit of grace to folks. You know, if people naturally see an increase in their income that is still within close range of 100% AMI, it can go up to 105% AMI, and those folks are allowed to make that and still be considered an affordable unit. The developer is obligated to market the project to affordable applicants. They are obligated to report to the city annually at request for the income thresholds, and then every 5 years they are obligated to give us a complete rundown of all the units and the AMIs and report which ones are affordable units. So beyond that, they also have to give us a 3-year notice that they're interpreting that the affordability period will end, and that they could then theoretically transition those to market rate at the end of that 20-year period. I think if there's anything else in here that's not sort of our boilerplate that you see. We do have something that we worked on pretty intentionally. If you go to section 13 on page 6, there's default language. So what happens if we find out that they're not annualizing an average of 20 units in the rental stock, or if we see that you know, there's any other violation of the terms of the agreement by them or us. We do have cure periods of 60 days. And then in the event that things are not cured, by charging the correct rent in a manner that's consistent with the agreement and paying liquidated damages in the following amount, we have the right to assess damages 2 times the excess of actual rent received by the developer over that period out of compliance. And then we can actually enforce, and then whatever enforcement costs of the city, so attorney's fees or any staff time and materials. The goal would be, in the event that we can do that from a liquidated damages standpoint, we receive double the overage. So the city would have the option to remit that overage back to that affected tenant without having to make them party to the agreement. That's sort of the idea there. And then doubling the penalty, obviously, to make it something that someone would want to avoid. So that was where we landed on that. Let's see here. I think for the most part, those are the terms that I wanted to make sure everybody understood. So it's required by the statute. It's a 20-year period. The units that are restricted as affordable have to be 100% or below for AMI tenants. And then we do have recourse in the event that there's a breach. We are allowed annually to ask for a record, and then every 5 years per the statute, they have to give us a complete rundown of all the metrics related to their affordable units in the facility. And with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Manager?
Director, do you want to talk a little bit about why we did a rolling 20 average as opposed to?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So that was a little bit of a sticking point in the language between the parties. Not contentiously, just technically the way the original draft was written for that 20-year period. Theoretically, a developer could have 40 units for the first 10 years and then 0 units for the next 10 years after that, and that wasn't really our intention. And so we just changed the language to say annually you have to have sort of an annualized average, because they're going to have a lot of rent turnover with as many units as they have. So there will be years where they have 18, and then they'll have years where there's 22 or 25, and that they have to maintain an annual average of 20 units at that affordable threshold.
Commissioners, questions, comments? Commissioner Coach?
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to get a point of clarification. So you had mentioned that they have to have an average of 20 over the course of the years. And the language, does it state that there can be more than that? Because you talked about having up to 20, there would be some years that maybe they have 25 or sometimes they have less. But one of the things that you had mentioned earlier just kind of got my brain thinking, was talking about how, well, maybe somebody goes over the threshold and then they would have to make the next available unit, so a affordable unit. What happens when they are full?
Sure. And so that's the reason that language is written that way. It actually says next comparable available unit. And the reason for that is and I also mentioned during those remarks that pragmatically speaking, many more than 20 are likely to have people at or below 100% of the AMI. A big portion of the 300 plus rental units are one bedrooms and studios that are specifically going to be marketed to young professionals, people working in the service industry, maybe older folks that want to get out of their larger home that is larger to maintain. And so there's going to be a large range of incomes by design in the pro forma. When you say next available comparable unit, that's saying, okay, you had a one bedroom unit that was being rented at Mr. rent rates, and say theoretically the next unit to come available is a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment, and the Mr. rent rates for that size unit are pretty much in line with market rate. And so it's not in the community's interest or Parkland's interest to make that unit the one that they determine as an affordable unit. So they would wait till the next comparable unit, which would be a 1-bedroom. And so that's why we're recognizing that it has to be a rolling annualized average, because there will be times where somebody leaves, or, well, probably not theoretically leaves, because then that unit would become the next affordable unit. But if they go considerably over income, maybe they bring another roommate into the unit and that causes them to be considerably over income, or they get a better job, something like that. They have during that lease period, to what we call in the agreement as a defined term, the grace period, where this one is currently over income and listed as an affordable unit. By the end of that lease period, you have to have either opened up another affordable unit, or that person has to comply with that affordability component. And so in the event that they are full and there are no units available, that's the reason for that average, as opposed to saying you have to always have 20 full stop, or you have to have, if you have less, you have to have this many more. It's their responsibility to meet the average metrics to comply and be eligible for that state income tax.
Thank you, Commissioner Cochin. Anything else to ask or add, Commissioners? Commissioner Kilgo.
Thank you. The state of Michigan just passed the source of income bill, saying that different types of income can be discriminated against. So Parkland won't be able to discriminate against applicants with vouchers, correct?
Yes, that's true. So that statute applies, but in addition to that, we also have Section 7 in our terms in the agreement, which is a non-discrimination clause, and it references that any state protected classes cannot be discriminated against, and so income, race, gender, any other familial ties, anything like that can't be used to determine tenants.
And then my last question is, has MISTA for quite some time now had a market rate rent calculator, or is that something new for MISTA?
MISTA's control rents, there's two different schedules that MISTA comes out with. One is the MISTA rent limits, and so they put out a very detailed schedule of rent limits based on area median income, household size, unit size, bedroom count, and then they have that published for all 83 Michigan counties annually. And the control rent is what they're publishing now for some of the other state tools in our toolkit that have been recently added for housing, such as the housing tax increment financing through Brownfield, which will come before you on the 28th for a different project. So that establishes the county's control rent. And then if someone can show through a market study in their development that they have a gap between what they can capture in rent and what that control rent is, they can actually TIF that gap. That's separate to this, but this would utilize the MISTA rent limit tables. And they've always put those out. We use the same limit tables when calculating LIHTC deals.
In the 20 or the average of 20, they're going to try to keep at 100% of whatever this year's number is for that.
They have to comply with that number annually, so they can't increase rent any more than whatever the threshold increase was in that MISTA table from year to year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kilgo. Anything else to ask or add? I have some questions. Oh, you have something? What?
No, it looks like Rachel has something.
All right. Commissioner Gorman, did you have something to ask? or add?
Yes. Well, no, I just have to read this out loud and then ask. So, hold on. At the end of the year, the developer has 30 days to submit a report. Hold on.
What section and page are you looking at?
Section 8, the long one.
According to
Section
city.
8, so, okay. End of the year, 30 days to submit the report. We find any problems, you have 30, you tell them that. They have 30 more days to respond. If we're not happy with that response, then, well, they have 30 days to respond to that. Hold on. If the
They have
developer
60 days.
that's what I was.
Yeah.
Fails to cure the deficiency within 30 days, the city may exercise its remedies. Okay, what is this? Each successive, oh my god, period of 30 days following the initial breach in which the developer fails to cure the deficiency still constitute additional breach. What is that 30 days after?
Which subsection of number 8 are you in? Are you in breach and default? Section 8? Yeah.
The 30 days, each successive period of 30 days following the initial breach in which the developer fails to cure deficiency shall constitute an additional breach under this section 8, and the city may exercise its remedies for each such breach. That is like a swirl of 30 days. I'm just trying to understand like what point we get to that point.
I'm sorry, I'm still not finding where you are. I'm in.
Okay,
I'm
it's like
on
right before 9.
The last paragraph
Yes.
of section 8.
subsection B.
Where I think things start to compound. I just want to understand what it is.
Okay, the events.
Yes. Wait. Yep. Down. Keep going. This part right here.
So, as my understanding, within the first 90 days, that report must be submitted. You may accept that report or request documentation from the developer to verify some or all of the information in the report, in which case they would then have 30 days
to respond.
To your request for that additional documentation.
But this is where, and this
Guess
is
it's a
just
cure
my
period,
question:
yeah.
is then what happens then if we're not happy? Then they have like this is where I'm just trying to keep track of the 30 days. They have 30 more days.
To cure, if after 30
Correct.
days or within that 30-day period,
Yes.
they give you the documentation that you were requesting because you didn't accept the initial report, you find deficiencies in what they have submitted within that first 30-day period, then they have 30 days to cure it.
Yep.
And if they do not cure it,
Each successive 30 days is an additional breach, and it basically
So
is
every month is another.
in order for us to be able to
constitutes one
collect on
breach.
our breach recourse, which is double the collected overage.
Okay, so it okay. That
Basically, it's like if we find that you had 12 months where you overcollected
Yes.
and you don't fix it in that 30 days, now you're at 13 months overcollected, and every time you go 30 days past, we are entitled to that same breach resolution, which would be double the collected rent remitted to the city.
for that month.
And then they're not correcting the breach until they correct the rental overage.
okay.
I apologize, I wasn't seeing where you were. Somehow I managed to switch my two agreements that I have up here midstream, and so I was like, I don't see where you're looking at that, but that was my fault.
I was also going to make a joke and say this is why attorneys get paid so much.
I know. Yeah, I think I'm gonna. Okay, thank you.
So how was it determined to do 20 years for this affordable housing agreement? So the typical brownfield is 30 to 35 years. We typically do 30 years for the developer, additional 5 years potentially reimbursed, or that can be additionally collected to go into the brownfield revolving loan fund. Is that the same case for the transformational brownfield? The transformational brownfield would coincide with that 30-year period, or
So
is that a lesser period for the transformational piece?
yeah, we not to correct the estimable mayor, but we don't always do 30 to 35 years in a local brownfield. That's the statutory maximum allowed, and it's basically a math problem to see how long it takes to pay someone back with the taxable value created. So, as an example, we have a built-in deferral, and you'll see all this tomorrow in the TBP TIF table, but we have a built-in deferral of their other tax incentives, which is a 2 or 3 year deferral, and then it effectively takes about 20 years to pay them back because of all these other tax areas that they can collect on. And so the 3-year deferral of the effectiveness of this agreement for the affordability period combined with the 20 years makes it coincide with the term of the TBP. That was the intent.
And the term of the TBP is in
It
total?
starts in, I think it's 2026, and then again, there's a 3-year deferral because that works out better for us for our 5% capture for the BRA in the long run. So we asked them to do that in exchange for us lowering the admin fee. We'll go into detail on that tomorrow, but it ends in the same year that this 20-year period ends, which should be 2048, I think it is.
Okay.
And I don't have that document right in front of me. To
So basically, the gist of it, this
Coincides with the
coincides
TBP.
with the term of that. Okay.
Which I believe is statutorily required.
And that's what and our this supplants our brownfield,
It's
or is this this complements our traditional brownfield?
So the way to think about TBP is it effectively is sitting on top of a local brownfield. So one of the prerequisites for consideration for a TBP is an approval of a local brownfield plan.
And what is the term of our local brownfield plan for this?
It would be the same length of time. So that it's
the
one
exact same time.
It's
Okay.
one TIF table considered for both pieces, and it's one large brownfield plan. It just includes that transformational brownfield plan component as approved by MSF and MEDC.
Okay. And what is the determining factor in terms of the number of units that are required? So the state, as part of its transformational brownfield plan, is requiring a affordable housing agreement. What stipulations do they have in terms of, do they use a percentage, do they use a raw number, or is it just they leave it to the local municipality to decide in concert with the developer how many units must qualify as part of the affordable housing agreement?
They don't specify by units, and every TBP project that's been funded has been drastically different based on like what type of housing, what unit count. And so with this one, we went for it's between 5 and 6% of the total units. But the reason that we wanted to restrict 20 specifically is because if you look at the total unit count is 615, but most over half of that, or just about half of that, is for sale product and not subject to affordable constraints on rents. And of the 300 and change rental unit products, the majority of them are going to be the same rental product as the affordable units, which is either the studios or the one bedrooms. The challenge we run into is if we go over 5 to 6% of that rental stock, it starts to make the project non-performing, and then it won't pass underwriting with MEDC, and therefore will not achieve its transformational brownfield designation. Because this has to go through the same underwriting process, actually a more stringent underwriting process with MEDC than some of the other incentives that the state uses, such as CRP, Community Redevelopment Plan. So that's how we landed on those numbers, is effectively a mathematical problem to figure out what is the most number you can restrict in rent inflation over time, as you would with market rate, against what will actually make the pro forma for the project, the financials for the project, perform to the extent that MEDC needs to see.
Okay. So right now we're at, with 20 units, we're under 5%. With my understanding, there's 432 new apartments coming online.
342.
That's not the number I got from the developer. So
Is it 442?
432 is the number I got.
Apartment stock.
432 new apartments is what I have. It's total of 547 new units plus renovation of 33 existing units, or 580 units total. Of the 432 new apartments, the current unit breakdown is as follows: 31 studios, 347 one bedroom, 44 two bedrooms, and 10 three bedrooms. So at 20 units, that's less than 5% of 432. If we were to do 7%, which sounds like you were saying that's the maximum we would go before it starts undermining the pro forma, and then it potentially puts at risk the transformative brownfield plan via the state. At 7%, we'd be at 30 units. At 5%, we'd be at 22 units.
Yeah, I wasn't meaning to state that 7% was that number. I'm saying my understanding was we were at 5%, 5 to 6%. So if that's a math mistake, it's my mistake. But at any rate, the pro forma review with Warner Norcross and Judd, who's the consultant working with MEDC, this was the number of units that they determined could average to withstand that rent threshold with MISHDA over time. And so again, there will be years where they have more units that are sitting at those same rental rates. The real difference is over the course of that 20 years, can they flow with the market and which ones can't? And so 20 units was what the developers pro forma indicated allowed them to still meet the debt service coverage ratios that are necessary for MEDC's underwriting. Yeah.
Okay.
So I make no claims on 7%. Again, it was a.
So this is just generality, 5 to 7% in general for transformational brownfield projects in terms of.
I think it's even difficult to say that, only because there's only been 5 of them approved, and they all have different components in their affordable housing agreements, and there's a lot of latitude as to. You have to have this component to be eligible for 100% of the state income tax capture. That being said, these projects vary so widely in scope and intent that they give a lot of latitude to the developer and the municipality. So this one effectively is the number of units that we felt over an average year by year could not undermine the financial performance of the project from MEDC and the lender's standpoint.
Okay.
They're looking for a certain debt service coverage ratio, and you have to be able to guarantee that. And so restricting too many units to a rent threshold undermines the ability to show that.
Okay. Like you said, some years there'll be fewer, some years there'll be more than the 20 designated, but on average it's 20 over the.
They have to keep an average of 20. Pragmatically speaking, especially in the early years of the development, it will likely be more than 20.
Okay. Obviously we need to be conscientious of the pro forma and what they can sustain for development, and also ensure they get the state supports that's needed. But of course, you know where we're coming from. We want to get as much affordable housing or lower, more attainable housing that is more affordable and attainable for as many of our residents as possible. But we do really appreciate, I really appreciate the intentionality of this developer with trying to get as much density out of the project, period, to bring down the average cost of the units overall, whether they fall under this affordable housing agreement or our market rate. He's still conscientious of trying to have a lower price point, so it is accessible to our working professionals and others in the area.
Yeah, I agree with that. The study that they've done, several studies now, really indicate that they could double the size of these studio and one-bedroom units and probably get close to the same rent per square foot. But that would make them very price restrictive to a lot of our community that live in the city already. And I think they have a real intentional goal of trying to make sure that people that are working downtown can rent in these places and actually access this facility and all its amenities that they plan. So, I have found a good experience with them having a real unit diversity and price diversity, both in the for sale and the for rent product.
Okay. Thank you, Director Echolm. Anything else to ask or add, commissioners? Before we move on to the next agreement. So this affordable housing agreement for the Shaw Walker redevelopment will be on the commission's agenda tomorrow for formal review and vote. Next up, Shaw Walker Community Benefits Agreement. Director Echolm.
Yeah, thank you. So this is not a requirement for TBP. I want to start by saying that's the real difference between these two documents. Without the Affordable Housing Agreement, there is not a TBP approved to the extent possible under the statute. The Community Benefits Agreement is something that we as staff requested the developer consider, and the reason was over the course of time, as I'm sure you've noticed, we're getting more and more large format projects. This one is the largest so far, but they are becoming more and more common as we effectively redevelop the community on a lot of these vacant legacy sites. And so one of the things that we wanted to start working into these negotiations for tax incentives and infrastructure improvements is some ancillary direct benefits to folks that live around these places but may not live in these places and may not directly benefit from the amenities that they provide. So, as an example, folks in the NIMS neighborhood are definitely going to see a net benefit in getting rid of this legacy industrial building that is dangerous and an eyesore, and that's good. But they may not benefit from the pool and the hot tub and all the cool stuff that's in the building. They may or may not avail themselves of the retail. So, how can we engage those areas of the community to make sure that they receive benefit from these legacy projects was really the question. And so we started doing some research. Larger format communities, sort of what we would call primary market communities, have been increasingly utilizing community benefit agreements. Specifically, the city of Detroit is the leader in this in the state of Michigan. They have gone so far as to implement a community benefits ordinance for several reasons that I'll detail in a different meeting. I am hesitant to do the same, but there's nothing that precludes us from having community benefit agreements for each individual project that is taking place adjacent to residential areas. So this is the first one that we've done, and I think it landed in a really good spot. So a lot of this is just effectively basically states that the city, in lieu of direct financial incentive to the project, has been asked to give support by amending adjacent infrastructure, which is to be expected. Obviously, this is an old legacy industrial building, so it's going to need new water sewer connections. The road is sort of designed to be an industrial corridor road right now in Western rather than a primarily residential and mixed use and park space road. So there's some things that they've asked of us, and in exchange for accommodating those requests that are outside the boundaries of a state incentive, we've asked them for certain considerations as well. So there's a lot of boilerplate in here. Some of it matches the stuff in the Affordable Housing Agreement, the non-discrimination. The breach and default is slightly different. We have a 60-day cure period. And then the effective date goes into effect after it's fully executed and authorized. So this one takes effect after it's executed as opposed to any kind of deferral. Because again, it's running in tandem with that TBP, but the TBP is not contingent on this agreement. And there's performance milestones that both parties have to accomplish in order to make that work and in order to make the project work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to the exhibits, because I think that's what really the impactful portions of this agreement are found in the exhibits. So Exhibit A starts on page 6. These are the things that the city would agree to do. Within 6 months of the, this is number 1, within 6 months of the date of the agreement, we would abandon the 12-inch water main that currently runs under the subject property. So we have a water main, a storm sewer main, and a sanitary main that actually run under the factory portion of the site as you see it today. The Knoll factory was what it was. It now has some other lease tenants. Those predate that building. That building is the newest piece on the Shaw Walker property, and it was built over top of those. We don't know why or how that happened, but it did happen. And this one in particular, the water main, we'd like to relocate and run in an alternative area. So what we would likely do is cut and cap and abandon that stretch of water main in place, and then we would determine if there is a need to replace it and run it around the corner down Michigan and Franklin. In the event there isn't, and the pressure maintains stable, then that's great for us. We've abandoned that asset, and now it's not a liability to the developer or to us. In the event we do have to, we would reroute that within 18 months of execution of this agreement, and that would be at the city's expense. So the city shall, number two, I'm moving on to number two, at its expense, maintain the existing storm and sanitary sewer lines. So to be clear, the difference between 1 and 2 is we're proposing to abandon the water line and move it if necessary. We're proposing to maintain the existing status quo for the storm sewer and sanitary sewer. The reason for that is primarily the cost difference between running a water line and running a 60-inch or larger, storm and sanitary line. So these are much larger. Basically what we're saying is it's in everybody's interest right now to maintain this status quo because of the capital impact it would have on both the city and or the developer and the project, and the city's water sewer budget. So we're going to leave these here, but in the event that they do break in this area directly under the building, the city is going to have to make impacts to the property, and we agree to restore the property in the event that we have to. So that is a deviation. I want to make that clear. Typically, if we have something running under somebody's stuff and we have to go dig it up and fix it, we're not responsible for any damage of any built infrastructure over top of that. We're saying, okay, in the very unlikely instance that this thing breaks underneath the building and we have to actually excavate that building, then we are taking on the risk of saying, okay, we would replace that infrastructure. So I want to state again, that's unlikely. This is a very long main. It's only under the building and a very small part of it. There's also the possibility that we would simply abandon it and reroute it, as opposed to digging it up. So I wanted to point that out. Just for the edification of everybody, Director Vanderhyde had to leave, but he was involved in these conversations and this portion of the negotiation as it pertains to DPW infrastructure. Further, the city will provide the project connection points to the city's water mains, stormwater, and sewer from the city's existing infrastructure to the planned points of connection at the property lines with the existing buildings and proposed new construction townhomes identified in the PUD. So this is something we do for most developments that have a housing component. We tend to waive those connection fees anyway. It's just stated in here because we have a specific agreement on this topic. Unless otherwise agreed to by the parties within 18 months of the date of this agreement, the city shall perform a roadway realignment of Western Avenue consistent with the approved PUD design attached as Exhibit D. However, city and developer may first modify the PUD as necessary to increase the distance of the sidewalk locations from the existing buildings and propose new construction buildings identified in the PUD. So the concern there is a mutual concern. We want to make sure that the sidewalks are far enough away from the building that they don't feel like they're encroaching on the building and that they feel pedestrian friendly. So when I'm walking down it, I don't feel like I'm on somebody's patio or I'm too close to the road in either way. So we feel that they're in the right spot on the PUD, but in the event that we get to crunch time, we want to be able to amend that and still have this be enforced. So, and you'll recall in the PUD that it calls for us to effectively move the curbing over on further away from the building, because if you go there right now, it's very tight. It's not a lot of space between the street and the building space. And we would move the curving. The crown of the road wouldn't change, which helps the cost of the project, so we won't have to amend the actual roadway. It will simply be a matter of moving the curb and changing the striping on the road to allow more right-of-way that's not street. So again, that's also been approved in the PUD. And then the last one, if you've driven down there, you may have noticed that there's power lines on both sides of that street on Western Avenue. It's one of the few places in the city where there's high tension lines on both sides. The ones that are sitting close to Shaw Walker are only a few feet off the building's facade, and they are currently redundant. They're not necessarily used all the time. We're currently working along with the developer with Parkland to try to get consumers to move those and either get rid of them altogether or move any necessary lines over to the newer set of poles on the other side of the street. In the event that we incur costs there, what we've tentatively agreed to, providing commission support, is a cost share where the city will amend those. And the reason that we want to do that is right now the building's abandoned and it also was a different use type, but there will be 100 some odd households in that facade of the building, and we could not get a ladder truck up there if we wanted to. So the power poles and the lines are in the way of all of our firefighting apparatus, and there's actually been a letter sent along to consumers, or will be sent along to consumers if necessary by the public safety director, stating like, hey, this is a real hazard, we'd like you to move these. So we're hoping that consumers will partner with us on that. In the event that they don't, we've proposed a cost share where the city will fund 75% of the relocation, up to $200,000 with Parkland funding the other 25%, and then anything over that. And so we're not sure exactly where that's going to land, but in the event there are costs, that is the fifth piece of the exhibit. So those are the city's commitments.
Is for the relocation, are we advocating and trying to get the power lines buried, or just move to the other side of the street?
No, just move to the other side of the street, and that's a good question. So that was the first question everyone had, is like, could we bury these? And consumers pretty immediately said no. It's not just for cost reasons. Some of them are pragmatic reasons because of the setup of their substation at Franklin and Western. And so they mentioned that that would be a seven-figure remodel to actually amend that substation to accommodate buried lines. And so it's a way bigger project than just the lines if they were to do that. So practically speaking and cost standpoint speaking, they said it would be a lot easier from practicality standpoint to just move them onto the existing newer high lines across the street.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, we wanted them buried too, but then they would have had to bury both of them, and then they would have had to amend the substation pretty substantially.
Yeah, I was getting a little excited or optimistic because they launched a pilot program of burying power lines, Consumers Energy, not too long ago in different communities around the state. So I was like, let's add that to that pilot project and get that buried. But if the substation adds a wrinkle that inhibits that being done, or at least doing so at a reasonable price. Yeah.
At least for now, in the near middle term, that wasn't something that they were willing to accommodate. So in the event that would change, that would be a nice area to do it, just because of the view sheds for the public on, the sidewalk, the bike path, the road, the residential over there, everything would be improved. So it's definitely on our radar. That was the first thing we mentioned, like, hey, would you consider? And they had good reasons why it wasn't in the cards. So.
Okay, thank you.
So moving on, Exhibit B is the developer commitments. And so we've worked I want to, before we move on to this, Exhibit A, we specifically tried to focus on things that we knew were essential to the project, so infrastructure amendments, things like that, but also things that wouldn't directly impact the general fund. So we think that any financial obligations in Exhibit A can be achieved without direct impacts to the general fund, and that's really what our goal was in those negotiations. In the next one, Exhibit B, this is really the community benefits aspect of the agreement, and our goal was to make sure it's basically the public in the area and then the public citywide that benefit from the agreement that we make here outside of the parameters of the property line. That's really what we're trying to do there, is stretch the benefit beyond the project itself. So number one, developer shall formalize an agreement, what that would be called the Workforce Training Agreement, with Muskegon Public Schools, Muskegon Community Education Center, or MCEC, or any other comparable program operated by MPS to provide workforce training development opportunities in the hospitality industry to program participants and MPS general education students for a period of no fewer than 5 years. Developer shall provide a copy of the Workforce Training Agreement to the city upon request, and the Workforce Training Agreement shall be executed prior to the commencement of any city improvements outlined in Exhibit A of the agreement. So this has been something we've been working on for just under a year, since we've had the idea that this is a CBA qualified project that we think would be a good candidate. And we've had additional initial meetings between MCEC leadership and the developer, and they are now meeting one-on-one, negotiating the terms or agreeing to the terms. I'm especially excited that you may have read in the media that Parkland handed off management of their hospitality side of things to a more regional operator, and they have a lot of secondary education opportunities in that brand because it's a much larger operation than self-managing with Parkland. And so it's going to provide a lot of opportunities for kids in our school system to have a talent pipeline into full-time jobs when they get out of school, which is exciting. So, and potentially a lot of relevant experience if they want to get into hospitality management or hospitality finance, some things that are a growing sector in West Michigan from a higher education standpoint too. So we're optimistic about that. Developers shall pay for one capital or public asset improvement at the Hartshorn Marina Park within 2 years of the effective date of the agreement. This capital asset shall offer an enhancement to the park designed to meaningfully improve the quality of life for city residents and visitors. May include, but is not limited to, the installation of playground equipment or any other asset outlined in the park's master plan for the Hartshorn Marina Park that meaningfully improves the quality of life for city residents and visitors as mutually agreed upon by the developer and the city. Following developer's installation, city agrees to accept the sole ownership, ongoing maintenance, and liability of the capital or public asset or improvement. So effectively, I think all of you have been up to speed on the public engagements that we've done for Hartshorn Marina Park and the concept site plan that has been developed that is still working through review and approval by the Parks and Rec Authority Board. Effectively, we would be working with Parkland for them to fund and install one of those capital assets to that park. It could be the ADA fishing pier, it could be a playground, it could be picnic pavilions. We'll figure that out with some public feedback and engagement as to what the folks that use that park want to see. But they would agree to pay for one of those items, and then after that, it would become our item, just like the rest of the park's property. So that's within 2 years of the effective date of this agreement. So assuming it gets ratified tomorrow, the clock starts ticking, and they have 2 years to figure out what that is with us and put that in. Developer shall pay for one capital or public asset improvement as mutually agreed upon by the NIMS Neighborhood Association Board and developer within 2 years of the effective date of this agreement. This capital asset may include, but is not limited to, playground equipment at NIMS Neighborhood Park, improvements to the city right-of-way in the NIMS neighborhood, or any other asset that meaningfully improves the quality of life for NIMS neighborhood residents and visitors, as mutually agreed upon by developer and the NIMS Association. Following developer's installation, the parties agree either the NIMS Association or city will take sole ownership, ongoing maintenance, and liability of the capital asset, public asset improvement. So this is one where we really want, this is sort of kept not terribly specific on purpose because we really want the neighborhood association to determine what that asset is that they want, to benefit their neighborhood. We do know just in working with them over time that there have been additions to the NIMS neighborhood park that they lease from the NIMS school property that they'd like to put in. At least that was the case relatively recently. And then there's also, a large infrastructure improvement project happening on Southern, a large road reconstruction, which I think will impact most of the trees on that property. The city would obviously come through and replant those trees, but there may be some additional streetscaping assets or things that the neighborhood want to do to beautify Southern. We just don't know, and it's not really for us to say, but we want them to have to do it. And so that's the reason it's in here the way it is. And then the other one is developer. It's, again, relocation of the power lines, and it specifies that they have to provide that 25%, and then anything over the 75% share up to $200,000. Anything over that is their responsibility to get those lines moved in the event we have costs. We're hoping that's a moot point because we're hoping consumers will come through and move those lines.
Okay. So on that point of the cost of relocation and cost sharing, the city is committing to cover 75% or $200,000, whichever is less. So the maximum output or outlay from the city would be $200,000. They're committing to pay the 25%, and anything beyond the 200,000 or beyond the whatever.
Yep. So it'd be the math works out to we would provide $200 and they would provide $67,000, and then anything over and above that they'd have $100.
That's the number I was looking for.
Yeah, they'd have 100% cost share after that.
$267,000 or 60.
And we've had numbers ranging from 3 something to 5 something on that. We don't know exactly what that's going to cost.
Okay.
If it has costs, I'm going to keep saying that.
I just want to get clarification. So in the language used for Section 4 under Exhibit B, in the event developer is required to contribute to the cost of this relocation, developer agrees to cover the balance of the amount identified in Exhibit A, which is what we just talked about, and any remaining amounts not otherwise covered, offset, or imposed on the developer. Should that be on the city? Or, because it's saying not otherwise, so basically it's saying that developers agrees to cover the balance of the amount identified in Exhibit A, and any remaining amounts not otherwise covered, offset, or imposed on the, right now it says developer. So it's saying the developer is going to cover anything that's not imposed on it, or are we trying to protect ourselves saying they're going to cover that anything that's not imposed on us, the city?
The intention is that they cover full remainder, and that's what that language is meant. We spent quite a bit of time on this section specifically because the number is 66,666 repeating, and so we didn't necessarily want to put that figure. So the design is that basically we'll cover 75% or $200,000, whichever is the lesser, and then they cover the rest.
Okay, so that's basically just the legalese for anything beyond
Yeah.
that $267,000 that they would be responsible to cover.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good. I just wanted to get confirmation that,
Yep,
we
no,
didn't
that's-
inadvertently say developer when it should say city, and now
No, that
we're
language
left
was,
holding the bag or something.
That language was
So-
tricky just because of the odd dollar amount that 25% works out to, and so yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for your work on this, and thank you to Park and Properties for their work on this as well. Happy to see this benefits agreement, collective benefits agreement, CBA, being brought forward as part of this project. And I really I like seeing that partnership with Muskegon Public Schools and the Muskegon Community Education Center as well. Something that we've been encouraging and advocating for a number of years. And I'm really happy to see it in here. I do want to, just as a point of reinforcement or further encouragement, is to how we might be able to incorporate these beyond hospitality and specifically with regard to skilled trades. How we can arrange, partnerships and agreements between developers, this one or any others. I mean, we got hundreds of millions of dollars in new construction and development happening in the city. So how can we create those partnerships and those cooperative agreements whereby they are sourcing and providing opportunities for students in our community to get on-the-job training, a wage, so that they can improve their skill set, whether that's through trades or their financial literacy at the same time from having a wage-paying job. So I just wanted to reinforce that interest to see that component as well. Not trying to say we need to force it into here. You guys have worked quite a bit on this agreement. And I really do appreciate seeing that the tie-in with Muskegon Public Schools and MCEC. And maybe there are other things forthcoming, or maybe that they're open to opportunities outside of this CBA whereby the developer for this project and its general contractor and their subcontractors are being invited to work with MCEC or Muskegon Public Schools or any of our other local schools on getting students that on-the-job training, as well as and potentially a pathway to apprenticeship program.
I think, yeah, that's a point well taken. So we started by trying that, and what we really found was the developer was very willing to say, yeah, like, how would we do that? We're open-minded, and I think we, as a development team on our side, need to do a better job of understanding what the existing lay of the land is for those types of resources, because there's not no resources. You have the Career Tech Center and some other things. They're not universally well understood and incorporated, at least from our perspective. And so we really quickly kind of realized, like, we don't really have any infrastructure that we can kind of plug and play for a general contractor or subs to be like, oh, we want you to do this, and to make it enforceable in an agreement between the developer and the city. And so I think that would have been getting out over our skis a little bit, but it kind of exposed us in the sense where we're like, we really need to figure this out. And if there's not the infrastructure to make us able to do that, then who do we need to partner with in the community to build that? And so yeah, that's a goal for us this year as we do more of these, is okay, how do we provide people the tools to be successful if we put that in an exhibit? If I say I want you to go and while your job is having demo done, or like some of the stuff that's maybe more labor intensive on construction sites, and we want you to be able to have high school students, early college students that can talent pipeline into those things and get that experience to eventually work in that trade. How can I do that in a way that is effective and easy for those folks, that doesn't increase costs and liability to the extent that it makes it non-performing? And that's what we just don't understand. And so we are working on it. I think that's a point well taken, and it kind of showed like, hey, we don't really have an easy answer for this if we ask people to do it. And so that's what we'll be working on.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the work you've done to explore that and understand the challenges so that we can hopefully overcome them and make those connections, whether it is by a legal agreement or it's just having that strong relationship and that rapport that the developers and contractors are willing to engage in that regard. My only other question right now, and I'll go to my fellow commissioners, is given the costs that the cities would be absorbing or covering as part of the city commitments in Exhibit A, do we have an opportunity to tack that on to the brownfield, since the local brownfield plan is not at its maximum by statute number of years? Do we have the opportunity to amend the local brownfield plan and add those costs onto the end, so it's not interfering with their pro forma or their financials for the development, but it's tacked onto the end that we are ultimately reimbursed for those costs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked it because it jogged a point of clarification I wanted to make, and you'll hear more about it tomorrow. But again, I mentioned earlier that we, through our third-party brownfield consultant that we hire and working with our staff and the consultant for the developer, we determined that if we ask them to accept a deferral, so effectively not implementing some of their tax incentives immediately, it works us out to the good by about $5.5 million on the end of the brownfield. And so in lieu of amending the TIF table to incorporate these direct costs, we actually come out further ahead if we just defer the incentives, and then we, in exchange for lowering our admin fee, that costs the BRA about $800,000 over that 23 years, but we make about $7.2 million more than what we would have. And so that was what we worked out is okay. And the other challenge that we're running into is with TBP, there's no what we call a look back period. So on local brownfield, you can do work before the brownfield's approved and then still incorporate it into your TIF. You cannot do that with transformational brownfield. And so it throws things out of whack pretty considerably when we come into the TIF table with specific eligible activities, and we found a way to actually make it work to our benefit to a far greater degree financially at the end of the TIF table, which is where we would have put those expenses anyway. So for logistical reasons, it worked better to do it the way we did it.
I appreciate that creative, being innovative in that regard, problem solving. I would like to discuss that further. We don't need to go through all the
Yeah, we'll have that
nitty-gritty and the
full
weeds
item.
of that right now, but I would like to discuss that with you further offline, just so I have a better understanding of how that's all playing out and works.
Yeah, we'll go into some detail tomorrow because it's, and at the BRA meeting, because it's quite impactful. And it's the BRA's money that they're eligible for, and they can pass through those costs to the city for staff time and any activities the city contributes to the project, even if they're not in the TIF table. So that's where we come out ahead.
Thank you, Director Eichelm. I'll go with you just a second, Commissioner German. I did see Commissioner Kilgo come over here first.
Thank you. Director Alcom, I have several questions. Tomorrow, this developer will be in front of us for 3 different votes: the transformational brownfield, and then the 2 that we're talking about today. We probably will have a bigger audience and a bigger viewing audience and everything else. And, just the way that I know constituents and the way that they talk to me, I do have some questions. So with the second one, with the community benefit agreement, you had said that we probably wouldn't have to touch the general fund much. But,
Hopefully not at all is the goal.
but if, playing devil's advocate then, if consumer says, nope, it's going to cost you the maximum it would cost you, then it would cost the city $200,000?
Yeah, but not out of the general fund. So the goal would be either the public improvement fund or economic development fund would be eligible capital funds for those costs, which are not direct taxpayer dollars. The public improvement fund is historically funded from our liability insurance pool dividends that we get paid from the state insurance pool. And then the economic development fund is a variety of smaller funds, but the biggest chunk of it is some legacy dollars that SAPI left us when they left the community. Yeah, and those can be used for economic development purposes pursuant to spurring economic development in the community. Yeah, okay. We have a specific revolving loan program, but they can be used by commission consent outside of that program.
Okay. So to break it down, it's 5 items on A and 4 on B. Mm-hmm. And I think the developer could do more than 4 items on B. And the 4th item is really the same 5th item on A. It's just their half of it. And they have a neighbor really close, which is the Boys and Girls Club. To your knowledge, was there any conversation with their neighbor across the street in the Boys and Girls Club and doing anything community related with them?
I'm aware of conversations and opportunities to partner that they've discussed privately, but they have not been party to this agreement.
Okay. And then Do you know about how much it would cost us to abandon the water main that's currently under that middle building there for them?
Abandoning would cost very little. So I want to make sure that I answer this accurately. So abandoning or effectively excavating where it connects to the adjacent main, cutting it, capping it, putting like a little bit of concrete and a seal on it, and then leaving it there. And that's very common practice. In the event that the pressure and we have a contract engineer through Prine and Newhoff that would have to effectively do a flow study for us before we did that and say, we anticipate that yes, this will impact serviceability to the users or not. If they say not, that's great because it's a matter of a few $1,000s of labor and materials to excavate, cut and cap it on both ends, put the road back and call it a day. If they say yes, this would impact pressure, because you have to remember that line was for those industrial users that were there at one point. It's not necessarily for anybody that's there now. And so if they say, yep, with the projected use at this site and the existing users that are here, you're going to have reliability problems. Now we have to replace it, and we estimate the cost at somewhere around $400,000 to $500,000 out of the water fund.
So neighboring communities, Adelaide Point, Nims neighbor, none of them are affected by that current water main.
That's what that engineer would answer. We don't know that question.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then the maintenance of the storm and sewer lines is something we do already anyway.
Yep. So we jet those lines. I think annually. That's a line that not the storm, but the sanitary. I think that's a line that we jet annually already. And again, I want to preface two things. Going back to the water main quickly. That's on our exhibit saying we'll pay for it, but it's also in our interests because in the event that there is a failure of a water service line, you have to remember that's a pressurized system versus a sewer system, which is a non-pressurized system. So, a sewer main breaks and then it could be months later, if ever, that we find out and figure it out, which is unpleasant, but it happens. If a pressurized line breaks under a building, you're talking about potentially, calling the viability of that building's foundation into question. And so that's a huge life safety issue and also a public infrastructure issue because you're talking about potential pressure loss, boil water advisories, things that we don't want to mess with. And so while that is sitting on their exhibit on our exhibit because we're saying we'll move it at our cost, it does provide benefit to us as well. Whereas it's our benefit from a capital investment standpoint to leave the water sewer mains where they are because of the lower risk profile and because of our knowledge of their existing condition, whereas we can't get a camera into a water main to really know that.
So if just circling back to number one, if the water main cannot just be capped off, it would have to be rerouted?
Yes.
Okay. And then the connection fee waived, I understand we do that, with different projects. The roadway realignment, Western Avenue, would have to be realigned, which I heard about when the developer presented, we talked about a little bit. Is the roadway all on the cost of the city?
The roadway itself will not be impacted other than the fact that you'd reduce some pavement because you're moving that curb line away from the building. So we're talking about curb and gutter pan changes and then changing where the catch basins are for the storm sewer and then paint. We're talking about striping it differently. And so if you recall, and this was some time ago, so it's okay if you don't recall, and the final draft will have this page out of the PUD in it. The problem is it's very difficult to make it readable at this size, so we'll have a fold out for the signed copies. But effectively, what you're looking at is moving the concrete curb on both sides of the street and basically shifting the road over. But fortunately, we figured out a way to do that where you're not changing what's called the crown of that road, which is important for water runoff, obviously. So we can do it without having to tear up the whole road and regrade it.
Just a couple more questions. So the intersection of Western and Division will not be changed at all?
Would not be changed at all in the sense that the intersection will still be there. The only thing that would change is you'd have a little bit more potential sidewalk coming because the curb would actually be further away than it is right now. So you'd have more pedestrian. It'd be a shorter crossing or an equivalent crossing. It would just be shifted over towards the lakeside.
Okay. I thought I remembered something about some changes needing to be made at that intersection right there.
The PUD, the original copy of the PUD, there was questions from the planning commission that we then brought to you, and that was one of the conditions of approval, is that they changed that. It just had a grade change between where the private property started and where the sidewalk was, and so that just, it was with the caveat that that be ensured to be ADA compliant. If I'm remembering right, I'm absolutely paraphrasing, so.
There was also discussion of the crossings there, because the PUD did call for a mid-block crossing along Division, and then there was discussion about improving the crossings at that intersection of Division and Western. It wasn't, as I recall, nothing was hammered out right then and there, but there was a discussion and desire to improve the crossings there.
Without having it in front of me, I think the PUD calls for bump outs and crossings because the it's called for street parking on the street side. And so I believe that you have carve out for street parking, shifted curbs away from the building, and basically you're effectively moving the whole street environment further away from the building. But it shouldn't impact traffic flow, and then it shouldn't impact the actual crown of the street.
I'm sorry, where would there be street? I currently don't see any room for street parking on Division or Western.
There's street parking there right now.
On Division?
No, not on, well, Division has legal street parking on both sides, unless otherwise specified. It has to be signed, if I'm not mistaken. But, and I believe there's actually street parking available on both sides of that road right now.
Okay. And then my last thing is, I do think that the developer could work with a local neighbor there, do just one more thing, to have a actual community benefit. But when would we know about the what asset for the Hartshorn Marina and what project for the NIMS Neighborhood Association?
So that would come back, the asset for the city's park would come back to the commission because it has to be mutually agreed upon by both parties. And so you would have the ability to take commission action on that. So, and I believe it has to be agreed upon within 2 years of ratification of the agreement, which that's during the construction period. So the design of that timeline is before the project is completed. Before units are open and before people are living there, you have to have agreed to pay for this thing and ratified that agreement.
Okay, and I'm sorry, last question. Secondhand management. So Parkland Properties is not going to do the property management at Shaw Walker? It's going to be a different company? Or when you said secondhand management, you were talking about something else?
That's their hospitality, the hotels.
Oh
and
yeah,
convention center.
their hotels are managed by a larger format hotel management firm out of somewhere else in West Michigan. They've done that so that they could focus on these larger format projects they're working on right now. They mentioned that in a meeting, in a presentation here. Yeah.
But
that does not include Shaw Walker. It's strictly their hotels. That's a hospitality management company. Yeah.
Okay. They were also managing events at our convention center. Is that secondhand management company managing the events?
If I recall correctly, that's my understanding, is the two hotels and then the Van Dyke Mortgage Convention Center.
Yeah.
Thank you. No further questions.
I know that company also manages the Amway Grand Hotel in Grand Rapids, and I think also Van Andel Arena.
Yes.
I don't know about DeVos Place, maybe DeVos Place as well, but
I don't know.
I think Van Andel. One of the two. They manage several properties in Grand Rapids, downtown Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
I recall that. So
They're a direct company of that particular private
thank you,
office.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Gilgo. Commissioner German.
Oh, yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director Eckel. Just want to commend you on your good work that you're doing. It's a lot going on, and we've worked with Parkland for years, and work that he's done partnering with the city. And commissioners on this administration have talked about, and probably once that, the last commission really talked about community benefits and how we could have something like that to benefit the community as a whole. And you mentioned the Detroit projects. And As Commissioner Kilgore mentioned about the Boys and Girls Club, that would be a good prospect for some community benefits as well. But one of my main concerns is the economic gap for jobs for our local citizens. Have this been discussed where the local hiring requirements, where construction jobs for our local workers be added in this community benefits? Also, you have something in there about affordable housing, which is a good incentive, but and also supporting minority businesses also.
Sure. Yeah.
And and just to piggyback up on what you said, let me go back to this because I did look this up. The Detroit project. Let's see.
They have 11 total.
Yeah. Well, they had a $70 million or more public incentives. For example, when they this is at the Detroit headquarters training center, and they committed to hiring Detroit residents and for the internship, similar to what you're talking about with the Muskegon Public Schools, and $2.5 million to the community for programs. What is the scale of this project? I can't remember for this whole development.
It's over $200 million.
200 million. Yeah. And I agree with Commissioner Kilgore. I think a little bit more can be done, given the fact that this is a huge project. I don't know if you had those conversations.
Sure. I can go into some depth as to how we got here if you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a fair consideration. So, specifically, the project that we took a look at when we were trying to model what we were going to ask from the on the community benefit side is the Staples Center. And so, it had a local source hiring policy, which included talent pipeline components, like from their school, LA County school system, and then they also included like neighborhood specific amenities for people that lived within a certain distance of the proposed project. So the city of Detroit differs in several ways from what we're proposing right now. And I want to remind everybody this is our first community benefits agreement, right? So they have an ordinance that specifically designates thresholds for if you're going to have this size project, and you want this level of incentive, then we want this monetary value. It's very programmatic and formulaic. There are some key differences between our community and that community that makes that pragmatic for them and maybe not so pragmatic for us. And so this project cannot happen without the transformational brownfield. Several of the projects that are in the city of Detroit that are in that CBA list on their website did not receive transformational brownfield. They got the typical suite of local incentives that we would offer. The difference is when you look at primary market rent rates and the ability to cover your debt on a project like that, the revenue it generates against the liability you've got and the carried interests and the debt payments, it's a lot more feasible to do a project there than it is to do a project here. Because even though our rents are inflating rapidly and problematically in some cases, there's still a marked difference between, if you look at on the map and the website there for the city of Detroit where those projects are located, you're looking at rent rates somewhere approaching $260, $270, $280, $3 a square foot. Nothing in this facility would have rent rates anywhere close to that. And so that's really the key difference, is they have the ability to tell that developer, like, I know you're going to make this money because your pro forma shows me that you will. And so because of that, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And they can reduce that to a local ordinance because the math is right there on paper for everybody to see. Our math, as of now, is a tertiary community, so not a primary market, tells a different story. Where if it were not for these incentives, these state tools, we would not have a project at all. And so that's part of the reason, and that we really don't necessarily want to codify an ordinance related to community benefit, because it will make projects that are already difficult to pencil potentially impossible to pencil in the event that we have a specific formulaic requirement the way the city of Detroit does. That being said, if we establish a standard where we say, okay, we've done this now, we know that this can be done with projects in Muskegon, that makes it that much easier for our staff to say, hey, we want to do one of these in exchange for these local incentives or in exchange for these infrastructure improvements. The other big component that I'd like to work towards, Commissioner, over time is eventually we want to get sophisticated enough with this where, in this one it's NIMS Neighborhood Association, they're the one negotiating ahead of time, and their improvement is specified in this document. For the sake of time as to the Michigan Strategic Fund Board with the TBP, for the sake of construction season for the project and how that impacts the brownfield, for the sake that, we had to do a ton of research on CBA to even feel like we were comfortable putting one in front of you. We're not at that point with this document. Moving forward, you'll see them continue to refine into more impactful specified exhibits.
Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned the Staples Center. Actually, I had that one pulled up.
Yeah, that's a
also.
good one. Yep.
Yeah, in the Detroit one. But the incentive of having local workers
Oh, sure.
hired to do that work, and maybe a percentage of Muskegon workers to give back, so these resident and local contractors.
Yeah, the
should be
developer.
added in
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not mean to interrupt you. I was just
No, you're fine.
my train of thought. The developer can speak more intelligently because they've retained their GC and several subs, and I believe they do have a good track record for this project of using like local Muskegon County contractors, subs in this case. And I think they can give you more specific information on that. The challenge that we run into in these agreements when we try to say you shall X%, City of Muskegon, Muskegon County workers, the challenge we're running into is that there's a labor force participation and a labor force shortage now. And so in the event that when we talk to these contractors, they already have more work than they can handle because they're having trouble staffing jobs. This has been our feedback experience with them. Like during development season, when it's the weather thaws right up until it freezes again, the construction sector is doing very, very well. And so in order for us to say, hey, you shall do X% local workers, we have to have confidence in the ability to say, like, yeah, these workers are going to be here to do this project, not off doing some other project. Because as a cost basis standpoint, even though it's a bigger job, for my phase as like, say, a demo guy, I'm not necessarily going to be making more per hour or per day on this job than I am on the other jobs that I've already got. And so the market forces don't necessarily allow us to stipulate those things the way they do in a primary market, but we work towards saying, like, as you'll see non-discrimination policies in our agreement saying, like, hey, you can't preclude folks based on all these different metrics from participating in this project when you're selecting subs, when you're selecting individual employees. I want to be able to do the things those primary markets can do, but the profitability and the investability of the projects themselves has to reflect that. And candidly, they don't.
Yeah, well, we got to
We're working there.
work.
We're going in the right
and get
direction.
there, exactly.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner German. Commissioner Cochin.
Thank you, Director Dome. I've got a couple of things. One of the things I want to do is kind of piggyback off of what the mayor and Commissioner German were talking about in regards to, local workforce, as opposed to saying that they shall do this. What if instead of looking at it in that way, we looked at it as more of you get additional points in order to get approval for, more dollars from us if you do this? Is that something that we could think about doing?
I think there are aspects of our tax incentives that allow for those types of things. I think with this type of agreement, it makes it relatively difficult to say, okay, like, you're looking at the hard costs for your project and you're taking those hard costs to your bank and you're receiving dollars to fund 70% of the project from your bank for the project. And so for us to say, okay, we'll fund 40% of this water main if you do X, 60% if you do Y, so on and so forth, it makes it really difficult for them to take that to a bank and say, here's what our lendability is, here's the investability of the project. So some of these things are not necessarily terms that we're dictating, they're terms that the lending market to accomplish these projects are dictating, because they're looking for things like debt service coverage ratios, they're looking for equity invested against asked lending, and if we say we're going to fund this, then it makes it really easy if they can bring a signed piece of paper saying the city's going to, in the event this cost incurs, the city will cover it. If we say, if we can hire 25% of our workforce for this subcontractor from the city of Muskegon or Muskegon County, then they'll cover it. But if we can only find 10, then they'll only cover this. It just makes it more difficult in an already difficult project financing environment. So candidly, from a recommendation standpoint, I would hesitate to go that route. I think what we're finding is the more projects we do that are at this scale, the more engaged and inclusive the GCs become, because there becomes real cost savings to finding local subs. And so I have not found a project where it's all out of town contractors and subs. A lot of times the GCs for projects of this scale are not Muskegon County locals. And you can get into a whole debate as to why, and I'm sure anything I said the local GCs would disagree with, so I'll decline to do that. But they often, and in many cases exclusively, find like Muskegon area subcontractors to do core parts of the work: asbestos abatement, demo, electrical, you name it, any trades, you see local firms represented. So we have good outcomes, and I want, these projects to have an economic impact in the construction phase for the region. So far, that's what we're seeing. And so I haven't necessarily seen a red flag that I've had to raise an alarm and be like, this needs to be germane in these documents. I have not seen that in what we've seen in the pro formas, the bids, all that kind of stuff.
The other question is going back to Exhibit A. You were mentioning on Section 2 that we deviated from what we normally do in these instances. Can you explain, or are you going to explain tomorrow? Or
No, I can explain now.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why we're here. And so, number 2, the deviation is simply, in many cases, especially in cases where the sewer infrastructure predates the building, which is the case here. I don't know how that happened. It's not supposed to be able to happen, but it happens. And so, that building is sitting over top of that infrastructure. And so a lot of times what we would say is, hey, we need to move that in order for this use change to happen, and you need to pay for it. In this case, that is not really in anybody's interests for several reasons. One, it's not something that can be easily rerouted, because it's not only a sanitary main, which is exclusively locally controlled, but it's also a large storm main, and there's a lot more potential engineering and also a lot more state permitting as to where that's routed and how it connects to the county regulated outfalls. And so that's not timely, and it's also not inexpensive. And so it was determined in negotiations between the city and the developer. I think this is in our best interest for this to stay here for the time being, given what we know of its condition. Specifically, we know quite a bit about its condition from the SAW grant era, which was several years ago, where we got to camera and get ratings on all of our storm assets. And we have a sanitary jetter and camera on our own, so that's a little bit easier. So it becomes something where, the whole objective of the developer on this side of things is to reduce hard costs, because they're, going to be over budget. Like every project that gets bid right now is over budget. Tomorrow they'll probably reference that. And so their goal is to reduce hard costs. Our goal is to not impact funds that have issues, or the general fund. And so when we look at the likelihood of a failure that's actually underneath that building relative to a failure anywhere else in the line where it would actually impact that area of the line, it just seems to be the most pragmatic thing to do. Where we deviate also is in the event that it did have to get dug up. Traditionally we say, okay, and I'll pick on any of us homeowners in the city of Muskegon. I decide I want to put like a Japanese Zen garden in the right of way next to the street in front of my house, and I put it right over top of the water main and the sewer line. And then sewer backs up, cracks and breaks. It's the lateral that's at the lateral in front of my house. The city has to dig it up. They're going to dig up my rock garden, and they're not going to pay to put it back. And so traditionally that is the avenue that we would follow. In this case, given the fact that it's very unlikely that we would choose to actually excavate it anyway, we'd likely abandon it and reroute it. This is likely a moot point. All the developer is asking for from a consideration standpoint is, hey, if you do have to dig up our park, this will end up being like an indoor parking area. If you end up having to dig that up, we want you to put it back. We don't want to have to pay to put it back, is basically what they're asking.
And for the replacement, I know we talked about the replacing the water line main in number 1, but number 2, what is the estimate for having to replace and reroute that sewer main line?
That's a 7-figure cost. It's not a $400,000 or $500,000 cost. If we have to reroute that for this project, it's in the millions. I don't know that number specifically. Director Vanderhyde would have a better guess because he's a PE and a civil engineer. But that's part of the reason we're like, it's in everybody's best interest to let this be where it is, and then in the event we have to reroute it, do it.
Okay. I guess that other question would be for Director Vanderhyde. Then on Exhibit A, line item 3, we're talking about reducing the size of the road essentially, right? Because we're bringing the curb out.
Moving the road. So we would commensurately move the curb on the other side to a degree as well. So it's not a full width reduction. I think it will net out to a small reduction, but the driving lanes will not be reduced. It's effectively moving, it's effectively moving the curb lines from here over here.
The bike path that's currently going there alongside the road, is that going to be eliminated?
You mean the stripe, like the painted bike lane that's there? Yeah, I believe that's meant to be temporary until another project down the street has the bike path restored. So
Right.
yeah, that wouldn't be there anyway, in any case.
Right, but I'm just wondering because right now that is currently being, the bike path is currently being impeded by the other project. I want to make sure we're not eliminating
Oh, I
the
see.
alternate
Yeah.
bike
yep.
route at the moment.
So I think our plan there is there's 18 months from the agreement execution date, which is theoretically tomorrow if it passes. I believe our expectation and likely demand would be that that bike path is restored far before that deadline.
yeah.
And so I think it's a matter of, and if it becomes a problem, obviously we're going to stripe it again and put it back. But I think the thought would be this would get done after that work is already done and that temporary lane is already gone.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank
Oh,
you,
one
Commissioner
more,
Cochin.
one more thing.
And,
I'm sorry. Sorry.
well, I was just going to piggyback on the record. My expectation is for that Lakeshore Trail to be fully restored by this summer. That's my expectation and what I continue to emphasize to all parties concerned. So, Commissioner Cochin.
Yes, I'm sorry. There was one other thing I jotted down at the last minute, and when we were discussing, I think it sounds like Commissioner Kilgo, the mayor, maybe Commissioner German, and myself all kind of think that maybe there could be more done on the giving of the Parkland property to the neighboring areas. We brought up the Boys and Girls Club. I think that's a great, suggestion. The other thing that, comes to mind, especially when we're looking at number of things that we're getting versus we're giving, the marina, because we're talking about the park, not the marina itself. Was the marina part of that discussion?
Yeah, I think we say on the Hartshorn Marina Park approved master plan. So if there's elements that are included that could be marina specific, they could. I don't think that would be the preference from the feedback of the citizens we got in those public engagements because they don't necessarily benefit from that marina, but directly anyway. But I would leave that up to folks at the city who are more directly involved in those parks assets to decide and then make a recommendation to the commission.
Yes, and I wasn't saying in replace of, I can't remember which line item it was now, but the one that talked about the Marina Park, I went in addition to, since we only have basically 3 things that we are getting when we are giving 4 things. And we're taking on a lot of cost.
Potential costs, yes.
Yeah.
So I think we felt, Boys and Girls Club has come up several times, so we can bring it up. We had internal discussions as to whether or not that was the direction that we should go as to, approaching them about an exhibit. And we landed on things that were directly public trust or public trust funded. So as an example, public park, largely publicly funded in many ways, neighborhood association, and then public schools. And so the reason that we went that route was primarily because they are less funded by either private philanthropy or state and federal sources. And so it felt like something that we could make as a party in an exhibit to an agreement that was more enforceable. So that's the reason specifically that we went with the agencies that we did. One of them being us.
Thank you, Commissioner Cochin. With regard to Hartshorn Marina Park, when I see that or whenever I think of it, it's more of a Hartshorn Marina and Park. So that's how I read it. It's because it's the Marina and Park. It's not a Hartshorn Marina Park. So it could end up going towards the marina, and the park plan will encompass the marina as well as the park. So I don't think we necessarily need to throw in an and, but that's my understanding. That's how I'm seeing it in terms of Hartshorn Marina and Park there. I do want to just acknowledge, because it's been referenced a number of times, that the city's, giving 5 things but only getting 4, one of which is the same on each one. with regard to the power lines being relocated, I do want to just to acknowledge that with regard to item 2, that is, I don't even know if I'd qualify that as giving us anything. I mean, this is as much them agreeing to allow us to access their property for maintaining our municipal assets in an event that we need to relocate it, that we can access the property, relocate it, will not be obstructed by them, and it will be, at our expense to do so. It is our assets, but that.
Also, number 3, we do for everything with a housing component already. We strictly put it in there because we have a formal agreement in this case.
Yeah, it
There's
is
a
pretty
matter of
common with regard to item 3 that we do cover the connections. We did at one point have a suspension of those connections, but that's just been general practice that the city, as part of especially housing developments, new housing developments, the city waives the cost for those sewer and water connections. But in this case, with item 2, the developer is allowing is naming us to maintain, as Director Ekholm indicated earlier. We're going to maintain the city sewer lines underneath there, but if need be, they'll allow us, the developer, to abandon them as is there, rather than paying to dig underneath, remove it, which would be a considerable expense. So I don't know if I would.
It's to mutual benefit.
It's mutual benefit
When we
there.
were on the table, everybody mutually agreed like this can help both of us. It makes the most sense to put it on here because in the event there are incurred costs, they are our incurred costs. So that's why it's on our exhibit.
Mr. Manager?
So I just want to comment that the amount of time that Director Ekholm and Parkland and me to a certain extent have put into this agreement, and down to the detail of the words that were chosen in many cases, a lot of thought was given to this. I think another thing to keep in mind is, yes, this is a large project, and it's tempting to say that we should be getting more out of the project, but this is also a project that the city has been trying to get done for 25 years. And there's a reason that it hasn't been done, and it's because it's an expensive project. And the more we start trying to add on to a developer to try to get more out of it, the harder it becomes for the economics to occur. And last week, we spent 5 hours unscheduled in a meeting trying to detail some of those parts out on how the economics of these things work back and forth. And I think staff wouldn't be bringing this agreement forward this way if we didn't think this was the best option for the community in the long run. And then also looking at how, over the life of this project, once it's complete, the income taxes and property taxes that will be generated from this into the general fund that will allow us to do a lot of projects in the community that we wouldn't currently be able to do. So I think this is new for us, having a CBA, but I think as our first time out of the gate on this, Director Ekholm and his team have done a very good job of crafting something that we can, like he said earlier, point to with other developers to try to start to build on, but understanding that each project is unique. This is the first TVP outside of Metro Detroit, and a very large project for us in general. So I would just caution on trying to tweak these things, as it could make things not move forward, and then we continue to have this asset sitting in our core downtown undeveloped.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. That's good context for the commission and our community when they are considering these agreements and moving this project forward. I'd also note that with regard to the income tax, that would be the city income tax would be immediately accretive to our general fund, so there won't be any delay in that once we get from the construction employees, from the new residents, from the new employees there, they'll be immediately adding to our city's general fund. Vice Mayor St. Clair.
Thank you. 2 points, well, 3 actually. I think that this is an incredible work, especially for our first shot out of the gate at a community benefits agreement. I think that we could probably, take a microscope to it and try to move pennies around all night long if we wanted to. I would prefer not to do that. But I think, when we're talking about they do 4 and we do 3, what isn't being said is this is how many housing units?
Over 500
Yeah.
new units.
That is a significant asset to the community that I
it is.
think stands on its own. Anything else is icing on the cake. So I'm really appreciative of that, and the fact that a substantial portion of those are going to be income-based is incredible. So I think we need to keep that in mind, that everything above just getting this building in a safe and habitable status is extra. And then I think we need to be really careful about choosing from the bench where assets should go when it comes to nonprofits. I can think of a handful of nonprofits that are within a stone's throw of this that are all doing excellent work and that would love us to, as a commission, say, oh, well, you should give them your money. I don't think that's appropriate for us to make those decisions. And I think it's unfair for us to try to ask that of this agreement. It is a community benefit agreement, which means that it should benefit the community. I think having it be public assets makes every sense in the world to me, rather than naming specific nonprofits that we think should benefit. I think if those nonprofits want to approach the developer, that's 100% appropriate, and I bet they do, and I hope they do. But I don't think that is for us to steer that because it's biased.
Thank you, Vice Mayor St. Clair. Well stated. Is there anything else, commissioners, to ask or add at this time? Commissioner Kilgo.
Yes. Director Karczewski is gone, but our Parks Department has programming, right? And that's public, and it doesn't have to be a certain entity. I threw out Boys and Girls Club because I knew that we talked about maybe having lifeguards at Pure Marquette one day and just all sorts of different stuff, right? There's lots of great nonprofits around Muskegon. But our Parks and Recs department does have programming that helps young people and children in our community. I just think it'd be a good idea for us to see if we can get some more. I also want to say, yes, this is a transformational brownfield. I am the housing guy. I would love every single one of these units. I want to see Shaw Walker redeveloped so badly. But it doesn't mean that the commission has to say yes to it. I think this is our opportunity to say, what else can this developer do in the city of Muskegon? I think this developer's done great work in the city of Muskegon and parts of West Michigan in general. And I can't wait to see them finish the Shaw Walker building. But this is also our time to get it right. So I think that we should be asking questions on possibly what more, because tomorrow it goes to a vote and we have 3 items. If one of them fails, or if all 3 of them fail, everybody's got to go back to the drawing board, and it just drags things out. And I don't want to see that happen. So that's why I think that some of us are asking questions on possibly maybe what more can this developer do in a community benefits standpoint. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kilgo. Commissioner German.
Oh, yes, thank you, Mayor. Point taken to, all my colleagues here. And Director Echo, we've had this conversation before when we talked about development, community benefits, how we, local contractors, minority workers, for businesses. And just from my time spent traveling across the country with different organizations and attending these conventions, I see this a lot. I've seen this a lot. And the public that has actually given their hard-earned time working, paying taxes, deserve to have something back. A lot of times you see developers come in and don't give anything back. I commend Parkland Parks and Mr. Rux for even taking on this task, and you working with them. It's long overdue, and if we're going to do this, the community definitely has to benefit from it. It's not anything wrong. We advocate for them. We work for them. So, as an elected official, my job is to do what my constituents ask me to do, but also do what's in the best interest of the government and the city as well. But everybody has a benefit, from this, because we're giving a lot, but also the developers is putting up a lot. So my recommendation from the observations over the years is long overdue. I've sat on this commission quite some time and seen developers come in and not even offer anything. So 2025, I think, is time, and a project at this, magnitude, I think there's wiggle room to actually ask for more and see, if that's something that the developer would be willing to do, or maybe you, the director head, in your position. I don't know how you approach that, but I mean, you've always made it work before, and I don't think there's nothing wrong with asking. The old saying says, closed mouths don't get fed, and if you don't ask, you won't know. You could either be yes or no, or you can't do it, but I think it's worth that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner German. Commissioner Kochin.
Yes, thank you. So this project, it's big. It's important. It is going to change the way a lot of people view our city, I think. And I've spoken with Mr. Rooks. I've toured the facility a couple times, and I'm excited about this project. At the same time, I know he's excited about this project too. I have a gut feeling that he is not going to walk away from this because commissioners are going, hey, did we get everything that was available at the table? I don't think that he's that kind of person who's going to walk away because we're asking questions and going, is this everything? Did we cover our bases? Did we ask the questions when we were at the table? And I think that's one of the big things that many of the commissioners have voiced, and even the mayor have voiced tonight, is, did we ask these questions? And it's not necessarily directing any one organization over the other. It's just going, hey, did we think about this? Was that at the table? So we're well informed and we know what we are voting on. And I think that's important.
I think Commissioner Kochin. Any final thoughts before we move on with this? So tomorrow we do have the Transmission Brownfield plan. There'll be a public hearing and then a vote on that plan. And then we will have separately the affordable housing agreement and the community benefits agreement. Those two items will be under new business. It's not on the consent, it's new business and public hearing at the top of the meeting. And I may end up reiterating this tomorrow, but just I want to share my perspective on this and echo some of the sentiments that I've heard from commissioners and staff tonight. The things when we ask and we want more. We want to get as much as possible. It's natural inclination on the part of anyone to get as much as possible, and particularly when you are elected and charged with representing our residents and their best interests. We have an extra interest in trying to get as much as possible on behalf of our residents. That interest in what we want to see, how we want to serve our community, what we want to obtain, what progress looks like, what we want to achieve, all of those things we as a commission, need to collectively communicate to our professionals at City Hall, to our city manager, to our development services director. And we do that through these conversations. We do that through our goal setting that we do on a periodic basis. We do that in our legislative policy committee meeting. And so it's when we take those opportunities to share what our interests are, our residents' interests are, our objectives, our goals, what we want to accomplish, when we reinforce that and communicate that to our professional staff, then they are charged and empowered to carry that forward with their conversations that they have with developers and into any other counterparties that they're crafting agreements. And that they're doing the best work they can do, informed by what our desires and objectives are, while also informed by their professional experiences and their education to try to get the maximum benefit for all parties concerned, for our city as an organization, our residents, and the community, and the investors and developers and business owners, because we want them to succeed just as much as we want as our city to succeed. And so I do understand the desire to try to get, squeeze every bit out of there. I'm just not so keen on trying to do this at this 11th hour or during a meeting tomorrow when we're voting on this agreement to say, hey, I want to add this new section, or I want to modify this section, or whatnot. It's good to have the questions. It's good to give the feedback. Whether you do that privately with our professional staff or you do it publicly, so they're aware and the community is aware that we're having that dialogue, we're having those questions, that we're reinforcing what our desires and goals are. But being careful not to let that undermine or inhibit progress. So I just wanted to share the thoughts circling in my head right now and my perspective on this. And I'm look forward to hearing more tomorrow. We'll hear from the developer, and they may have additional information to share with us. And we can always give our feedback directly to them and encourage any developer or any investor, or encourage nonprofits in our community, as Vice Mayor St. Clair said, encourage nonprofits in our community to have those conversations with developers and business owners in our community. So thank you for the conversation, the questions, and the feedback that's been happening tonight. And so I'm looking forward to what's presented tomorrow and then the final deliberation before we go to a vote. But I think, Mr. Manager, you had something to add before we conclude tonight's meeting?
Yeah, and I just want to say that, and I say this a little bit a minute ago, that there are different things that were asked for by the developer that Director Ekholm and I just said, weren't tenable for the agreement because it was the city giving up too much, and we needed to make sure that there was a win in here for the community. And there were things that we talked about with the developer, trying to understand how all these different pieces work together. I think that, Director Ekholm and myself, we talked to all of you a lot, and we were trying to find components that we thought were wins for the whole community, particularly areas that were connected to the school system and in geographic areas, as the director pointed out, to the project. One of and this was long discussions that got us to where we are now. And as I've said in other things that we brought before the commission, sometimes it's just a matter of yes or no for what the staff has brought in front of you. And I would just encourage everyone to think about how this looks over time and what this does for revenues and what this does for the community as a whole as this project moves forward, how it changes the vision of the community, how it changes the perception of the community, but also how it can impact the perception of folks who want to come here and do business in the future when they negotiate with staff and we bring something forward, and then if it's tried to be changed in the dais at the 11th hour, if there's 7 different opinions on that, that can make things a little rocky too. So just something else to keep in mind. So, and
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Yes, Commissioner Kilgo.
I'm sorry.
Before
I'm sorry. I have a question.
Yeah.
So they have been working on asbestos removal and all that. They've been working on the building, right? They've been doing some stuff. All of these things are coming to us. We haven't had a chance to get pricing on power lines, pricing on the water main, or pricing on, because if worst case scenario, this costs $4 million and this costs 200,000, I think if it does, like devil's advocate, it costs us the maximum amount of money, our constituents are going to come back to us and be like, well, why are you giving all this money to X, Y, and Z? So I think that's why we're saying, asking questions and saying this, because tonight we do have the dollar amount for the 75%. So it could cost us up to $200,000.
Yep.
But some of the other things, we don't have dollar amounts for them. And I think that's important. So I just want that to be said. Like, this is huge for our city. I want to see this project get done, but I also think that the commission should have as much information as possible.
Thank you, Commissioner Kilgo.
I don't think anyone disagrees with that.
What's that?
Said I don't think anyone disagrees with that.
Oh, yeah. No. Director Echolm? Yeah,
As a point of clarity, we did, through Public Works Engineering Department, have their engineer's opinion of costs on the water main, and it was between $400,000 and $500,000 was the estimate. So that it was stated here verbally, but we declined to put a range in there because until we get bids, it could come in substantially under or substantially over. Engineer's opinion of costs are simply that. They're an opinion of cost based on the material and like cost per foot, and then that factors in labor and contingency. So the sewer mains, that's something that, that's a shot in the dark opinion of cost, because it would take substantial engineering and soft costs just to determine how we would reroute them and where we would reroute them, where it's fairly obvious how, and you have a lot more options with a pressurized system. Again, speaking back to the fact that it's our goal to leave them in place. So that's certainly not an effort on our part to not give all the information necessary to the commission. Thanks.
Just desire to leave that in place with the contingency that if it must be rerouted, that will cover that. With regard to the $400,000 to $500,000 dollar amount that you mentioned, and that's for the water main. What was there consideration of putting a max, like similar to what we've done with the relocation of the power lines? If there's a cost that needs to be incurred by us and the developer, we're committing to no more than $200,000 and no more than 75%, whichever is less. So was there a contemplation of doing something similar for the water main to have a hard cap? And if it needs to be renegotiated down the road, it can be renegotiated on the road. But was there a contemplation of doing a hard cap on that?
There, again, was contemplation of multiple cost-sharing structures, but we would come back to the fact that it is to our benefit to move this piece of infrastructure. And so that was a piece, that was a hard cost consideration being asked for by Parkland that we found was in our interest to accommodate, because, again, future liability in the event a pressurized line breaks under private property is substantial to all parties involved. And so we discussed lots of different cost sharing over multiple meetings and lots of hours. And this was an equitable interpretation by both parties. And it's, again, purely a recommendation. So.
Okay. And again, they're committing to allowing us to abandon and then we're relocating it. So we're not going to remove that water.
We're hoping to not relocate that water main at all. We're hoping to depressurize that section, cut and cap it, and get it done in a day. So that's the hope. But again, like, it takes substantial time for our third-party engineer to kind of research that based on flow tests, and there's got to be some sensors put out and things of that nature. And to answer your question from earlier as to, they've been working on this project, that's true, but we have not been specifically negotiating the community benefits agreement. And I would also add that all the work that they're doing on this project right now is primarily demo and asbestos abatement, things like that. They are specifically doing that, acknowledging that they are not going to have that as an eligible cost for the TBP. So they're doing that to keep on schedule in good faith, despite the fact they will not be reimbursed through this state vehicle for those costs. So that's something that they've done in good faith, acknowledging to keep schedule for the phase of the project. Their costs that could have been reimbursed had they waited, but they wanted to keep on schedule to do the project in the timeline that they committed in their planning commission PUD and other documents that we've already brought before you.
Yeah, and
For the sake of giving all the information and context to the commission when we're sitting around that table.
yeah, getting that blight redeveloped sooner than later, and people put into new housing sooner than later. So no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that additional context as well. Commissioner Kogo's concern with regard to having a cap or not cap, and resonated with me in terms of potential open-ended liabilities, and us being left holding the bag. With a much greater risk than we had anticipated. And it's happened in the city's past, and so I certainly understand, that question and the concern.
Sure.
And that's.
We had certainly had an understanding of costs with Public Works around that table and the engineering department around that table. So we didn't sign a blank check by any means.
Yeah.
We had engineers' opinion of cost on that water line reroute with the route that makes the most sense to reroute it if we have to.
So our various different departments and our professional staff have reviewed it and given consideration to cost and understanding of how we would pay for it if need be. And also, when we talked about, which I'll talk to you offline about, but we talked also about the prospect of tacking on these costs to the the brownfield plan and getting it reimbursed at the end of it. But you said that there's another route that we're taking, whereby the tax incentive delayed, and we're going to be coming out in a better position than if we did just tack on these eligible reimbursable expenses at the end of the brownfield timeline. And so that gives me more insurance too that we're not necessarily going to be left holding the bag, that we will have the resources to both reimburse ourselves and potentially come out ahead, given what you've come up with.
Yeah,
Not to mention, seeing this $221 million development get done, blight eliminated, new housing, new jobs, and income tax being accrued to the city's general fund immediately. So.
Credit where it's due, Jeff Salowitz, our third-party brownfield consultant, came up with that idea. I did not, so I simply let him read the math to me and said, "Yeah, that sounds right." But
okay, it well enough to relate to me.
He caught it, and
okay.
But to that point, we'll get into more detail on that. But we do come out ahead substantially, and there, is time value concerns as to amending that brownfield after it's got its scheduled public hearings and it's got currently working on its third-party review to be on the MSF board meeting. So all those things have six-figure implications as to what month those things take place. And the other factor hanging over our heads is right now, as I'm sure you have seen in some news coverage, the Transformational Brownfield Fund is effectively out of money with this project factored in as a piece of the money that's left. And so there are certain political aspects of this outside of our control, and there's other projects, major projects in the state that also want to be on the MSF board. And so without editorializing on how that process plays out, there are impacts to foregoing beyond the months of work we've done that can be potentially impactful outside of our control. They're not things that are in the terms of these pieces of paper. They're things that are other boards and other reliant parties that have to pass this as well.
Yeah, so significant delay, even if the developer, were to agree to any of the other conditions that the commission want, those significant delays could end up having these ripple effects that undermine and impede the progress, period.
Potentially, I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to create a boogeyman scenario for the commission.
It's a legitimate concern. If
but
right
for
now
context,
there's funding available for this project during the current timeline. If it gets significantly delayed, there's no guarantee that there's going to be additional, resources to support it in the future. And we might have lost the opportunity. And now a transformational brownfield plan, elsewhere in our state, swoops in and takes those resources, and we don't want to miss that opportunity.
Yeah, I sit on the MML Economic Development and Land Use Committee, and I'm quite sure that on our agenda for our meeting in Lansing next week, week it'll be how do we get the legislature to continue to fund TBP? Because as of now, it's not continuing unless the legislature elects to fund it.
Okay. Thank you, Director Echolm. Commissioner, any final questions or thoughts before we go to public comment?
Yeah, one there.
Commissioner
Mayor.
German.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a word of thought. The discussion of talking about the community benefits and the changes and some of the things that commissioners would like to see. I think it would have been a good idea, even though the department heads doing their job and they answer to you, city manager. I think it would have been a good idea to include the commission sometimes on some of these discussions, because when it comes in front of us, then we have to make that decision right then and there, and don't have all the answers or have time to sometimes really digest the information to make a good, formed decision. And I speak for myself. I can't speak for others, but I just think that moving forward, this is something that we've never done, and it's going to benefit the community. It's going to benefit the developer. But I would have liked to just had some conversation before this was brought to the commission, because, again, these are things that I've talked about with Director Echolm and some of the commissioners before, the ones that's serving now, on a community benefit agreement. And now we're here. But that's why we have all of these questions. And, people want to see things that benefit them. They vote for a candidate that's going to work in their best interest. And I think we all want to work in the best interest of our constituents, but at the same time, you want the information there so you can actually, again, look over it, ask the questions, and then when you come to vote, you have that final decision you can make and not feel that, oh, okay, I didn't know about this, or this wasn't added, or I didn't have figures here, or whatever. I mean, and that's just my thought, So I would like to see that, especially when we have big decisions like this coming in front of us. And if it comes up again, I think that would be a good approach to take.
Thank you, Commissioner German. Did I see? Nope. We're all good. Okay. Then we are going to go to public comment. Let's see any takers in the audience. So we're going to go to the phones. The number is 231-724-6721. This is general public comment, so you can call in and share your thoughts and perspective with the City Commission. It is not a time for question and answer or back and forth dialogue. It is an opportunity for you to address the City Commission collectively. When you call in, please turn down any audio in the background. State your name, and if you are a city resident, which neighborhood you're calling from, and if you're not a City of Muskegon resident, which other township, village, or city you may be calling from. All right, no callers?
No, Mayor.
All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion by Commissioner Kogo, supported by Commissioner Cochin. All in favor of adjournment, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you. Take care.